Hey friends, glad to see you on my channel. If you enjoy my content and want to support the channel, there's a PayPal link in the profile description. You can make a small contribution to treat me to a cup of tea. Thank you for your support. Let's get into the video. One day, a summer festival was taking place at the university. The girl was getting ready to participate in a competition where she had to draw a line from start to finish without touching the walls and avoiding all obstacles. Suddenly, she felt a large male hand brush against hers. The signal to start was given, and she felt the guy's cheek brush against hers, his palm confidently guiding her hand. Her heart raced wildly. His palm was warm and slightly damp. She could feel the heat radiating from him, his presence so close behind her. Her heart pounded so loudly that it almost drowned out everything else, the sound ringing in her ears. She flinched, and their hands slipped apart, causing the line to veer off track, which led to disappointed murmurs from the spectators. They had lost. The guy placed his hand over his mouth, sighing, while the girl looked at the paper, thinking that they were far from winning anyway, so it might be better that they lost quickly. Suddenly, the guy whispered to her that she knew he was a little crazy. She glanced at him, cursing herself for how her body reacted to him, and asked what he meant. His fingers gently touched her ear and began to caress it. Then his fingers moved down to the back of her neck, gently turning her face toward him. The guy whispered that he wanted to kiss her. Hearing this, the girl's pupils widened, and then she quickly jumped up and pushed him away. She covered his mouth with her hand, afraid that he might actually do it in front of everyone. The girl burned with embarrassment, trying to calm her racing pulse. Noticing her reaction, the guy smirked, his warm breath brushing against her palm. Then he gently grabbed her wrist and, bidding farewell to everyone around, said that they were leaving. They walked quickly down the alley, ignoring the curious passers-by. The girl, slightly out of breath, finally asked where he was taking her. People were already giving them strange looks, and the girl began to feel uncomfortable because of it. She asked him to leave her alone. He turned around and asked if she really wanted this. The way he held her hand and what he said made the girl recall events that had happened just recently. A large, strong male hand pressed her wrist against the couch. The girl closed her eyes, savoring the moment, and sighed loudly. Fighting with herself, she muttered something until the guy suddenly asked her if she really wanted him to leave her alone. The memories of that evening and his face made the girl sigh again, and she abruptly pulled her hand away. She pressed the hand that felt like it was burning from his touch to her chest. It happened in the summer, at a time when the cicadas were singing. The guy clenched his fist as if he wanted to preserve the feeling of her touch. That summer, she met the guy who changed her life. One day, the girl was doing her usual work at the cafe when her friend and colleague, Kim Hae-da, told her that their basement had been rented out, so she needed to take her things out of there. She replied that there was only trash left there and the things of her ex-boyfriend. Her friend, finishing preparing the order, replied that those were her ex's things, so it was up to her to deal with them. The girl froze at the mention of Lee Jae-heon. It was still a painful topic for her. Meanwhile, Kim Hae-da handed the order to the customer and smiled so sweetly that the girl felt a bit creeped out. The guy was her longtime friend and owned the building where she rented an apartment. They also co-owned the cafe where they both worked. Sometimes she wondered if she hadn't known him for so long, would she be able to feel the same flutter from his smile as the other girls who were their customers? The guy told her to stop daydreaming and finish her work. Today, he told her to finish early and rest, since she had been busy with volunteering before. The girl replied that the professor himself had asked her, so she couldn't refuse. The guy said that working for free like that wasn't good, and next time she should at least ask for lunch. After throwing out the trash, the girl dusted off her hands and was surprised by how hot June had been this year. She was about to enter when, suddenly, her gaze fell on the basement windows, where boxes with belongings were visible. She was surprised that Kim Hae-da decided to rent it out, especially since it had been empty for the past 3 years. To be honest, she didn't know how she was going to handle getting everything out herself. In that basement, only traces of Lee Do-hyun remained, now decaying. These were the belongings of a scumbag who had simply vanished one day. At first, they had a simple and comfortable relationship. She met him after graduating from university, when she was preparing to receive her degree in Korean literature. Lee Do-hyun was a handsome guy, and many people were drawn to him because of his kindness. Sometimes she thought she wasn't good enough for him, which is why she never held him back in anything. Yet, the guy remained loyal to her nonetheless. They had been together for 3 years, and their relationship was comfortable, easy, and natural. The girl was happy, and she felt that she didn't need anything more. Until one day when he left her without any warning. Kim Hae-da called it ordinary ghosting and offered the girl a lot of support during that difficult time. He offered her to rent a place in his building, saying that the house was in a safe neighborhood and that it would be more comfortable for her. Jung Eun-gyo looked like a ghost. She was withdrawn and indifferent to everything happening around her. 3 years ago, by a strange coincidence, Kim Hae-da bought a renovated building, and he rented the second floor to the girl for housing. On the first floor, they opened a cafe together, and they used the basement as storage. The guy reassured his friend that there was nothing better for a broken heart than money, and it actually worked. The girl settled into her new home and spent all her free time working. The success of her book came at just the right time. While she tried to adjust to her new life, the wound left by her failed relationship gradually healed. The girl thought that perhaps Kim Hae-da still believed she was carrying that burden, but thanks to her earnings, she had managed to heal from the painful relationship. She had managed to move far away from her past, but in the end, she still found herself here. The girl walked down the street, reflecting that in the end, the pitiful memories had overwhelmed her once again. Suddenly, a guy walked past her and entered the cafe. She turned her head towards him, but only saw his broad back and the back of his head. He left behind a trail of fresh fabric softener scent. The girl really liked the smell, especially since it was a rare treat on such hot days. She walked past for a little while longer, still lingering in the pleasant scent of the unfamiliar guy. Jung Eun-gyo arrived at the recording studio, where one of the guys handed her a milkshake and thanked her for her involvement in writing the script. The girl blushed and asked when they would start working. The guy replied that the announcer should be arriving soon and mentioned that he was a talented guy, even though he was from the sculpture department. Jung Eun-gyo was surprised and thought that an announcer from the sculpture department was quite strange. Just then, the entrance door suddenly opened. Her lungs were filled with the already familiar fresh scent. A tall, handsome guy entered the studio and apologized for being late. The girl found herself mesmerized by his smile. The guy looked very friendly and charming. The guy immediately went to introduce himself to the other members of the project, and the girl thought that he really did have a beautiful voice. She watched him from the side, sipping her milkshake. She lowered her gaze and thought that she would have preferred to avoid any unnecessary greetings. She was tired of meeting new people. To her surprise, the guy approached her, smiled warmly, and greeted her. She extended her hand and introduced herself. The guy greeted her once more and said his name was Lee Jae-heon. He squeezed her hand firmly, saying that he had heard she studied at their university and that he was very pleased to meet her. The guy respectfully called her Sunbai. The girl blushed and replied that she had graduated from university a long time ago and that he could just call her by her name. Finally, Lee Jae-heon was called for the recording, and everyone around them prepared to work productively. The girl stared at her empty hand, feeling a strange sensation, as if she had already met him before. She thought that, although she had experienced déjà vu, she would definitely remember a guy with such a distinctive appearance. Then, suddenly, she noticed the glass that the guy had left on the table in front of her. It was a glass from their cafe, and suddenly she remembered why his scent had seemed familiar to her. The scent of fabric softener she had smelled earlier that morning from the passing guy. It was definitely him. Lee Jae-heon didn't know what the girl was thinking, but he noticed how she glanced at his glass, and then her expression shifted to one of surprise. He smirked at the corner of his lips. Finally, the recording was announced to begin, and Jung Eun-gyo, leaning back, thought that it was a curious coincidence. She got ready to focus on the script. From the very first words, she froze in astonishment. The guy's voice was deep, sending shivers down her spine, yet soft at the same time. His voice was a perfect match for the character she had written. She listened to every word, and it felt as though the character from her mind had come to life and taken on a physical form. With one hand, she clenched the script and bit her finger with the other. The girl was excited and blushed. In that moment, she realized that she was probably going to have problems. Lee Jae-heon watched the girl and, noticing her reaction to his voice, smirked with a sense of satisfaction. After finishing work for the day, the group headed to the nearby bar for a beer. Jung Eun-gyo checked the time and decided she wouldn't stay out too late. Everyone around admired Lee Jae-heon's voice and how skillfully he conveyed the character's personality. They came to the conclusion that when someone is handsome, everything they do seems beautiful. The girl took a thoughtful sip from her glass and reflected that, truth be told, they had really managed to work well together. She remembered how she had hung on to every word he spoke with bated breath as he read through the script. Then, suddenly, she snapped out of it and thought to herself, Did she ever have a fetish for voices? The girl decided that things were bad if she was so drawn to the tone of his voice alone. Her thoughts were interrupted by the guy's voice, asking what she had been up to lately. Jung Eun-gyo replied that she worked at a cafe, tried to write, and traveled a lot. In her opinion, she was simply wasting her life. She said that her life was going on as usual, dull and simple. Sighing, she murmured that there was no passion in her life. At that moment, Lee Jae-heon, who had been listening intently to their conversation, focused and smirked. But no one noticed. But suddenly, the girl noticed his reflection in the mirror and was almost sure that he had been eavesdropping. She scolded herself for sharing such personal things so easily. Then, she began to study the guy carefully. She had always enjoyed peeling away the masks people wore and revealing their true nature. She was curious to know if his kind demeanor and sweet smile were truly his essence. She focused on listening to what the young people were chatting about and began to notice patterns in his behavior. After observing him for a short while, the girl became convinced that all his kindness was just a facade, and his smiles were carefully calculated, as if from a textbook. He was one of those people who were definitely two different people, inside and out. He was the type of person who easily made everyone around him feel comfortable and left no one indifferent. His charm undoubtedly made girls' hearts flutter. She could have classified him as a harmless narcissist, which, by the way, was rare in her circle. Her analysis of his personality was interrupted by an incoming call. She suddenly jumped up and said that she urgently needed to answer Kim Hae-da, as he had likely already closed the cafe and wanted to warn her about something. Her conversation partner said that they were annoyingly close and asked if they were dating. The girl grimaced and jokingly replied that they were like relatives who also got sick of each other. Jung Eun-gyo answered the call and heard her friend's dissatisfied voice. He asked if she hadn't finished yet. Then the girl remembered that she was supposed to clear out the basement. She quickly mumbled that she had completely forgotten about it and would come right over to take care of it. The guy replied that he would pick her up and help. Meanwhile, Lee Jae-heon listened carefully to the girl's conversation, from which he learned that she was planning to go to the cafe. The girl approached the group and said her goodbyes, mentioning that she still had some things to take care of for the day. She turned around and headed toward the exit, while the guy kept his eyes on her the whole time. He knew where she was headed and why, and in his mind, a plan of action was already forming. Jung Eun-gyo and Kim Hae-da were heading down to the building's basement together, teasing each other. The girl grumbled at the guy for starting to smoke again. The girl tried to turn on the light, but nothing happened. After a few attempts, the guy said he would go check the electric meter. The girl decided to make do with the flashlight on her phone for now and entered the room. She wondered why she even had to deal with all of this. She began to inspect the boxes and suitcases, and it turned out that she had quite a few things here as well. When she came across a box of photos, she picked one up and looked at it with a touch of sadness. Most of these boxes were filled to the brim with regrets. There were photos of her with Lee Do-yeon when they were still happy together. In truth, the girl would have gladly erased him from them if she could. She heard footsteps behind her and asked what was going on with the electric meter and why there was still no light. She was about to turn around and suggest to Kim Hae-da that they cut up the photos, but suddenly she felt her hands being grabbed. The strong man grabbed her very quickly and firmly and immobilized her by pressing his forearm against her throat. He swore loudly and asked what the hell this person was doing in his workshop, rummaging through things, but then he hesitated and fell silent. The lights on, and Lee Jae-heon saw Jung Eun-gyo frozen, her hands raised and staring at him in shock. The guy froze in surprise. The girl didn't know how to react, as his actions and words had scared her. Meanwhile, the guy continued to stare at her in shock, not realizing that he was still holding her tightly. He immediately lowered his hands and took a step back, apologizing to her. Lee Jae-heon explained that he had mistaken her for a thief and that he was really sorry. The girl rubbed her sore neck and replied that it was fine. To herself, she thought that even if she had been a thief, his reaction had been a bit too harsh. Suddenly, the guy stepped closer and gently took her hand, inspecting her carefully. He said he wasn't okay because of what had happened, and anxiously asked if it hurt. The girl trembled at his proximity and quickly stepped back. She repeated that everything was fine, but inside she struggled to catch her breath as his scent and the closeness made her head spin. She put her cap back on and said that she remembered him from the recording studio. The guy kept his eyes on her and replied that he recognized her as soon as the lights turned on. Jung Eun-gyo forced a smile and said that she had a bad memory for faces, which is why she was scared at first, not recognizing him right away. Of course, it was a blatant lie, but she didn't want him to think anything else. She asked what he was doing in this place, and the guy glanced around the room before replying that he rented it, and now it was his workshop. The girl was surprised and asked if she understood him correctly. He gave her a questioning look and said that since this morning it was his workshop, and then asked if she had a problem with that. He smirked smugly when he noticed the girl blushing, clearly surprised by the revelation. Kim Hae-da descended into the basement, glancing around suspiciously, confused as to why the lights kept flickering on and off. As he entered the room, he saw the girl and their new tenant together. The two young people were standing and chatting casually. Then he forced a smile and said Jung Eun-gyo that this was the tenant who rented their basement floor. To his surprise, the girl replied that they had already met at the Seonggun Sunby studio, where the guy had participated in the voiceover for a movie. Lee Jae-heon said he was very surprised to see her here, and she replied that she lived on the second floor and had come down to move her things out. Kim Hae-da gave a strange smile and asked if he hadn't said he would come tomorrow, wondering why he showed up at night instead. The guy smiled and replied that he was just passing by and decided to check something. The two of them looked rather odd together. Then, suddenly, he asked the girl if she needed help carrying her things. She blushed and protested, saying that she could manage just fine on her own. Then she added that she was planning to throw everything away anyway, so there was no need to overexert herself. To her surprise, Lee Jae-heon looked at her seriously and said that, in that case, she should leave the task to him. Jung Eun-gyo blushed and said that she couldn't just leave it to him and that she would make sure to clean everything up by tomorrow. However, the guy remained calm and kept insisting that since she was going to throw everything away anyway, he might as well dispose of it along with the trash after unpacking his own things. Suddenly, as she opened one of the boxes, the girl froze when she saw a small velvet box. Her heart skipped a beat, and she froze, staring at the object that brought back such painful memories. She heard the guy's voice from behind, saying that it's not like he really wanted to help her, but he was uncomfortable. Confused, she turned around and asked what he meant. The guy replied that according to the papers, the space already belonged to him, and he really didn't like when strangers rummaged through his territory. He looked at her confidently and with a smirk asked her to understand him. Jung Eun-gyo felt irritation behind his polite manner of speaking. The image he had been showing all day was completely gone, and she noticed something entirely different in him. While he stood there, impatiently waiting for her to leave, Jung Eun-gyo thought that this was probably his true face. After a while, the girl was in her apartment, turned on the fan, and went to the couch. Tired, she collapsed onto the couch, grumbling about the heat. She decided to relax and watch some TV. She started flipping through the channels when suddenly she remembered something. Her hand reached for the velvet box, which she had quietly slipped into her pocket and carried out of the basement. The girl opened the box, examining the familiar ring, and wondered why she had even taken it with her. Did it still hold any value for her at all? She remembered how Kim Hae-da had said that the most important thing was that the boxes wouldn't be in the basement anymore, and it didn't matter who got rid of them. He said that the tenant would really help them out if he did it himself. In return, the guy promised to treat him to drinks for a whole week at their cafe for free and asked if Jung Eun-gyo minded. The girl sighed and replied, "Let it be that way." She said that since she was causing trouble, she would make the drinks for him personally. The guy asked if she worked at the cafe, and the girl replied that she and Hae-da were co-owners. Lee Jae-heon applauded her, saying that he had heard she was quite a successful writer and still managed to work and run a cafe. Kim Hae-da intervened and said that it was already late, and they wouldn't bother their tenant any longer. The guy watched with interest as the friends argued and joked with each other. As she left, the girl wished him good luck with the move. She then thanked him once again for taking care of her things. The guy smiled and promised that he would definitely throw everything out and that she shouldn't worry about it. Now, holding the ring, the girl examined it and thought that maybe everything happening was for the best. She had been avoiding getting rid of these things because they held memories of that time, even though they weren't hers. She had even forgotten why she kept the ring. Perhaps she had planned to pawn it in case hard times came. The girl slid the ring onto her finger, and to her surprise, after all these years, it still fit perfectly. She didn't want to leave something like that behind, only for a complete stranger to throw it away. After all, it was made of precious metal. Then, suddenly, she froze, realizing what she had just done. The girl jumped up, removing the ring from her finger, thinking she had lost her mind for trying it on and that it was high time to forget all of this once and for all. She approached the open window, took a deep breath of fresh air, and thought to herself that it was all behind her now. The whole story had ended 3 years ago, and she wouldn't allow her past to haunt her anymore. Meanwhile, Lee Jae-heon was talking to his mother on the phone. The woman was complaining that her son had moved into some basement instead of choosing the art center space she had found for him. He was looking at a photo of Jung Eun-gyo with her ex-boyfriend and pressed his finger hard into the guy's face, crumpling it. The guy responded to his mother, saying that he really liked the place he chose, especially since it's close to the university and the neighborhood is nice and quiet. Lee Jae-heon accidentally came across the girl's personal diary. He opened it randomly to a page with a photo of her and read the entry. He held the phone to his ear, but no longer heard his mother. His mind focused on the entry. It had been written about 5 years ago, and a smile slowly crept onto his face. Through the flow of his thoughts, he heard his mother's voice complaining if he was even listening to her. The guy quickly closed the diary and said that he was busy with the move, so he was a little distracted. The woman said that they definitely needed to meet and have lunch at least once, as they hadn't seen each other since his return from abroad. The guy agreed and said goodbye to his mother. He was about to leave when he saw Kim Hae-da at the entrance. The guy was leaning against the wall, smoking. Lee Jae-heon was surprised and asked when he had started smoking again. Kim Hae-da replied that he had started again recently. Jae-heon responded that he had quit a long time ago and suggested that Hae-da try quitting as well. He was about to leave when he heard his friend's voice. The guy asked if it was true that he didn't know Jung Eun-gyo was in the basement when he entered. Then Kim Hae-da asked if it was really just a coincidence that Jae-heon ended up in the voice acting group for her script. Jae-heon put on an innocent expression and replied that it was indeed a coincidence, and as a graduate of the art faculty, such an experience was simply an added bonus for him. The guy exhaled a puff of smoke and said that no matter what, thanks to him, the girl would finally get rid of all the junk she hadn't been able to throw away for years. He warned his friend to keep his mouth shut and not let on that he knew Lee Do-yeon. Lee Jae-heon smirked and asked why he should do that. Was it true that the girl still hadn't forgotten his older brother? Kim Hae-da immediately stepped up to the guy and poked him in the chest, saying that the girl felt nothing but disgust for his older brother. He told him to sit tight and keep a low profile so she could live in peace. She had suffered enough from their breakup, so she didn't need to find out that the guy was the younger brother of her ex. Jae-heon didn't react to his friend's remark and calmly agreed. Then he took the cigarette from the bewildered guy and threw it on the ground, saying that smoking wasn't allowed here, and that as the owner, he should be the first to follow such rules. Then he waved at him cheerfully as he headed to his car and said they'd see each other tomorrow. Kim Hae-da watched as his friend drove away, thinking to himself that he was behaving rather arrogantly. Jae-heon had his own plans for how to handle things with the girl and why he had orchestrated all these events with the rental. Jung Eun-gyo was serving one of their regular customers at the cafe, and the two women were chatting cheerfully. The customer asked what had happened to her lip, and the girl smiled, replying that she had forgotten to close the window at night, and a mosquito had bitten her. Hae-da appeared, holding a tray of buns, and said that the cake would be ready soon as well. The girl placed the order on the tray and thought to herself, who would have known that the guy, who was quite popular at the literature faculty, would also be such a skilled cook? She knew that everything he took on always turned out excellently. It wasn't because everything came easily to him, but because he achieved everything through hard work and persistence. So when he extended a helping hand to her, she accepted without hesitation. When the girl returned to the counter after delivering the order, the guy told her that the strawberry cake was ready. She looked at his culinary masterpiece with admiration. He told her to go to the kitchen and eat the strawberries he had left there especially for her. The girl began eating the strawberries and checked her email. To her disappointment, she received yet another rejection from the publishing house. Although she had sent her manuscript to them several months ago, they had only just replied with a rejection. They replied that her new work lacked an original synopsis, compelling content, and an intriguing plot. In short, her books were no longer gaining popularity. Suddenly, the girl remembered that several years ago, when she was just starting her career as a writer, she had left many notes in her diary. She ran up to the counter and told Hae-da that she needed to go down to the basement for a moment and asked him to cover for her. The guy agreed, but as she rushed off, he couldn't help but wonder why she needed to go down there. He felt uneasy about the growing connection between her and Lee Jae-heon. The girl carefully made her way down, wondering if he had already thrown away all her things. She noticed that the door to the room was slightly ajar. She politely knocked and apologized for the disturbance as she peeked inside. Jung Eun-gyo lifted her gaze and was about to ask something, but froze mid-sentence. The girl couldn't take her eyes off his back, trying to collect her thoughts. The muscles on his back stood out clearly, and despite her tension, she couldn't help but notice how smoothly and confidently he moved, carrying out his work. Jae-heon turned around, realizing that the girl was watching him. He had nothing to be embarrassed about, so he simply said that he got dirty while working and decided to change. The girl just stood there, silently trying to collect herself. Jung Eun-gyo quickly lowered her eyes to the floor, blushing, and began apologizing for intruding so suddenly. She took a deep breath, wondering why she kept finding herself in such embarrassing situations, and decided not to waste any more time. Without hesitation, she asked if he had already thrown out all her things. Pulling on his t-shirt, the guy casually started moving toward her and said that there were still some things left. He then asked if she was looking for something specific. Still feeling embarrassed, she lifted her eyes to him and said that she was looking for a small box with a smiley face on it. The guy replied that the box she was looking for was still there. Jung Eun-gyo continued to feel embarrassed and asked if she could take a few of the things from it. Suddenly, the guy leaned toward her face and asked if she wanted to take her protective items. The girl's face flushed as she remembered that there were such items in the box. The guy continued, saying that by now they had probably gone bad. The girl quickly replied that she only needed the notebook from that box. She lifted her gaze to him and asked if he had already thrown it away, hoping to find it if possible. The guy remained silent, listening to her intently without answering. Finally, Jung Eun-gyo called his name, not understanding why he wasn't responding to her. Then he suddenly asked what was so valuable in there that she was searching for it so desperately. Eun-gyo didn't know how to respond, but then the guy turned around and said that he had kept her diary because he realized it wasn't something that should just be thrown away. The girl was relieved and asked him to return it to her. The guy started rummaging through the box and, with a smirk, asked if she really wanted him to return it to her just like that. The girl didn't like his tone, as it was originally her possession, but she didn't want to argue with him. She said she would treat him to lunch instead. Jae-heon walked over to her and replied that he didn't need charity. The girl was surprised and asked if, in that case, he wanted her to help him unpack his things. Suddenly, the guy leaned closer to her, his fingertips brushing against her cheek, and in a low voice asked if he could really ask her for anything. Eun-gyo tensed at the proximity, feeling his breath on her face. She froze, staring at him, and when he gently traced his finger along her lower lip, a shiver ran through her body. His voice grew even lower as he said that her lip was swollen. Then, suddenly, he withdrew his hand as if nothing had happened and said that it seemed like she had been bitten by an insect. The girl stood there, unable to comprehend why he mentioned an insect for a moment. She wrapped her arms around herself to stop shaking and asked if he always behaved this way. The guy smirked and asked what she meant by that. The girl said that he was acting a little strange, that the persona he showed in public was very different from how he behaved when they were alone together. Jae-heon said that she had already figured everything out. Despite his efforts to appear friendly, the girl had seen through him. He looked at her and said that she had already managed to analyze him and figure out what kind of person he was. Eun-gyo suspected it, but now she was completely sure. She was surprised that he didn't try to hide his bad character. She had thought he would continue pretending to be a saint. She carefully looked at his smug grin and realized that this man enjoyed making her feel uncomfortable. She decided not to play by his rules and not to indulge him. To the guy's surprise, the girl calmly apologized. She started to leave and said that she had rushed a bit, and that the diary wasn't that important to her, so he could throw it away. Jae-heon asked if she was giving up too quickly. Jung Eun-gyo replied that she didn't like silly jokes or psychological games. Suddenly, she felt the tips of his fingers barely brush against hers, and a jolt of electricity ran through her body. She turned around and saw that he was looking at her anxiously, asking her to stop. Jae-heon became serious and asked if she was angry with him. The girl looked at him, putting on a mask of indifference, and asked if she should be angry with him. The guy took her palm in his and asked again if she was perhaps annoyed. The question surprised the girl greatly. Since she didn't know how to respond, the guy smiled slightly and said that it was his fault and asked for her forgiveness. Eun-gyo was even more stunned after hearing these words. In the next moment, he genuinely smiled, and he looked so kind and sweet. He said that he would definitely return her diary to her. The girl carefully observed him and thought about how quickly he changed his mood. Yet, his behavior still seemed absurd to her. Suddenly, they heard the voices of some young men coming down the stairs, discussing how their friend's move seemed to be finished. The girl immediately pulled her hand away from his. She turned around at the sound of voices, while Lee Jae-heon carefully examined his hand, which had suddenly been left empty. His friends were coming down the stairs, discussing whether he was in his new studio, and they wanted to congratulate him on the move. Taking advantage of the situation, the girl quickly left, throwing over her shoulder that she hoped he wouldn't forget his promise and would bring her notebook. She bumped into a group of young people who greeted her and then looked after her, puzzled. The girl suspected that they were all about the same age. Since Lee Jae-heon was around 5 years younger than her, his friends were likely young as well. With a hint of sadness, she remembered herself at their age and headed off to work. Finally, the workday came to an end, and Eun-gyo told Hae-da that they needed to hire an assistant, because lately there had been so many customers, and she couldn't handle it on her own. Hae-da replied that it wouldn't be a problem, as it was currently vacation time and there were many students looking for work. Saying goodbye to her friend, the girl headed up to her floor. She passed by the workshop but heard no sound, assuming that the young people must have already gone home. She entered her apartment and decided that most likely the guy would return her diary tomorrow. She collapsed onto the couch and started staring at the ceiling, wondering if her old diary would inspire her to write a new story. The girl covered her eyes with her hand from exhaustion and tried to admit to herself that her last manuscript had been poorly written due to the pressure she felt. And even though there were books that sold well, she couldn't shake the feeling of burnout. Then she suddenly jumped up, convincing herself that she needed to stop moping around, and her stomach growled loudly, reminding her that she hadn't had dinner yet. Eun-gyo took her phone and decided to order delivery, and while she waited, she would take a shower. After a while, the girl heard the doorbell ring. Wiping her wet hair, she made her way to the door, wondering how the courier had entered the building. After the shower, she felt so exhausted that she didn't even check who was at the door. The girl simply opened the door, thinking she'd grab the food and go straight to bed. But then, suddenly, she heard a familiar voice, and her sleepiness vanished as if by magic. In front of her stood Lee Jae-heon with a slight smile, holding out a bag of food. He asked if it wasn't dangerous to order delivery at such a late hour. The girl asked in confusion if he was working as a delivery person. The guy laughed and replied that he just ran into the courier by the stairs and decided to bring her the food himself. Then he handed her the diary and said that he thought he might as well give it back to her. Eun-gyo anxiously stared at the diary, flipping through it to make sure it was intact. She was very flattered that he had kept his promise. As if reading her thoughts, the guy said that he had intended to come by at closing time but didn't make it in time. He said he thought she needed it urgently. She sincerely thanked him and then suddenly blurted out, asking if he was hungry. She mentioned that she had ordered too much food. The guy looked at her strangely. He was surprised by her offer but didn't show it on the outside. Then, unexpectedly, he turned around quickly and said that he had a couple of bottles of good wine in his car and that he would bring them. Eun-gyo, who initially thought he was joking, watched his retreating figure. Jung Eun-gyo decided to leave the door slightly open so the guy could enter. To be honest, she had only suggested having dinner out of politeness, not really expecting him to agree. She thought to herself that he probably wasn't the type of person who would hide his intentions. He had come to her place so late and even went to get wine. It was too obvious what he was up to. Apparently, since she had already figured him out, the guy just saw no point in pretending. In the end, the girl decided that Lee Jae-heon was just a boy having fun, and she wouldn't pay any attention to his behavior. Eun-gyo decided to set the table in the living room and turn on the TV to make things less awkward. She sat down, waiting for the guy, and suddenly blushed. She didn't want to admit it, but the feelings she had during the day had intensified by night. When she saw him half naked, it truly threw her off guard, and she felt an interest toward him, but it was only a fleeting impulse. That's why she couldn't understand why she felt nervous and embarrassed now, knowing she would be alone with him. Her thoughts were interrupted by Jae-hyun's voice as he entered the room holding 2 bottles of wine. The girl instantly jumped up and said she would bring glasses. She reached for the glasses and asked how he planned to drive if he drank wine. The guy calmly replied that he would just spend the night in the studio. The girl asked how he planned to do that since the studio wasn't set up yet. But Jae-hyun replied that he would figure it out and added that he had brought some very good wine. The girl invited him to the table and asked if he had tried this wine already. The guy replied that it had been a gift to him, but it should be good. To his surprise, the girl took the bottle in her hand and confessed that it was her favorite and that she bought it all the time. He didn't comment on it. Eun-gyo thought to herself that she had indeed ordered a lot of food and decided that inviting the guy wasn't such a bad idea. She didn't notice at that moment as Jae-hyun reached out his hand toward her. Suddenly, he gently took a strand of her hair and ran it through his fingers, saying that her hair was still wet. The girl froze, not letting him know that his gesture felt too personal for her. The guy asked if she wasn't worried about catching a cold. She calmly jerked her head and freed her hair from his grasp, replying that it was no big deal and that they would dry quickly. Then, she asked if she should open the wine. Lee Jae-heon smirked and said in a low voice that he was more experienced in such matters. But the girl asked why he thought so. The guy simply replied that he worked part-time at a bar while studying abroad, and sometimes he had to open several dozen bottles a day. The girl handed him a corkscrew and said that, in that case, he should do it. He took the bottle and said that he had noticed it earlier, but it seemed to him that the girl was quite easily influenced by others' opinions. Eun-gyo replied that it might be true and that she just didn't like empty arguments. The guy smirked and asked if she wasn't denying it because she was older. The girl looked at him carefully, studying him for a moment. Then, finally, she asked if the guy was aware that he was a bit strange. Lee Jae-heon looked at her with interest, but didn't respond to her last remark. Then, suddenly, the girl said that maybe he had known her before. The guy smiled and asked if that was a question. Eun-gyo replied that yes, because he behaved and said such things as if he already knew her. The guy poured her some wine and responded that he knew she had been a talented student at the Faculty of Literature and had successfully published several of her books. They drank glass after glass, and the guy asked what was so strange about what he had said and why she thought they had met before. Eun-gyo replied that he simply reminded her of someone, which was why she had that feeling. She thought it was better not to tell him that he reminded her of her ex-boyfriend. She simply said that her question probably seemed too trivial to him. The guy smirked. The girl smiled and said that it was almost a cliché to ask someone if they had met before, but it really felt that way to her. She asked if it sounded funny. Suddenly, Lee Jae-heon reached out his hand toward the girl and she pressed herself into the sofa, thinking he was going to hug her. Noticing the blush on her cheeks, the guy smirked and said that it was the first time someone had told him he resembled someone. He leaned over her, reaching for the box of napkins. At that moment, the girl felt her heart race, a surge of excitement as she realized how close he was to her. His scent enveloped her, and the sound of his low voice sent shivers down her spine. Stammering. She said that she didn't mean his appearance, just that his aura and voice reminded her of someone. The girl felt more nervous and tense because of his voice and scent than because she was aware of his intentions. She thought it was a bit funny. She had never reacted this way to a man before. Lee Jae-heon glanced at her sideways, noticing her embarrassment. He set the bottle aside and said that all the food had already gotten cold and that it would be better for them to eat something else. The girl tried to argue, saying that it was still tasty, but the guy smiled and said that if she didn't want to risk getting food poisoning, it would be better not to. Lee Jae-heon leaned over the sink and washed his face with cold water. He wanted to clear his mind, even if just a little. He ran his hand through his wet hair and smirked, recalling the girl's words about how he reminded her of someone. Then he looked at himself in the mirror and thought that he knew exactly who she was talking about. And knowing that, he could definitely say that their resemblance was impossible. He collapsed onto the couch and tossed his phone aside. Tilting his head back, the guy thought about how he had never gotten drunk from just one bottle of wine, but for some reason, today his mind felt clouded. Could it really be that Jung Eun-gyo had such an effect on him? His body spoke for itself. The evening spent with her had clearly affected his well-being and mood. Jae-heon immersed himself in the memory of his recent conversation with the girl. He had mentioned that her diary seemed to contain ideas for stories and asked if she planned to use it to write something new. The girl blushed and turned red from the wine she had already drunk, replying that she thought flipping through the diary might inspire her. The guy apologized and admitted that he had read a little of it, adding that he liked her notes. The girl was surprised and, smiling, asked if he had really deciphered her scribbles. Lee Jae-heon said that it wasn't difficult at all and that some sentences were repeated quite often. Then he looked at her in a strange way, as if pondering whether he should say something more. And suddenly he began to quote one of her entries. Hearing this, Jung Eun-gyo froze, as if the image from her mind had come to life, and now she could see and hear what she had been thinking. He perfectly reproduced the phrase she had written in her journal. The guy looked straight ahead and quoted, "Pat me, so that I can swallow you in one bit." Eun-gyo was so impressed by him that in the next moment she reached out to him, gently pulling on the edge of his t-shirt, and asked him to repeat it. Her eyes were shining, and with a smile, she asked the guy to quote the line again. She looked so excited that he would have done anything if she asked him, looking at him the way she was right then. And now he was thinking about what the hell this girl was doing to him. Why had she asked him to quote her notes? Did she really like his voice that much? She was full of enthusiasm and said that his voice was the best thing she had ever heard and that it was perfect for voiceover work. Then she asked how it was possible for someone with such a bad temper to have such a pleasant voice. Jae-heon smirked and asked if she was criticizing him, but the girl sighed dreamily and replied that it was a compliment. She admitted that she had liked his voice even back in the recording studio. She rested her head on her hand and asked him to continue, requesting that he quote something else. The guy was overwhelmed with feelings. He remembered the details of their conversation and her image, her burning eyes as she looked at him, and he thought about how casually and lightly she said such things. That evening, she drove him crazy, and that's why he lost control. Looking at what he had become now, the guy thought that he hadn't been a boy with raging hormones for a long time. He leaned his head back and began to think about what had affected him so much. Maybe it was the alcohol. He had almost made a mistake, but fortunately, he caught himself in time. Suddenly, his phone rang, and since it was 2 a.m., he knew it could only be one person. Not someone he'd want to talk to now, or ever. The guy didn't want to answer, but after the call came a text message notification, and he reached for his phone. It was a message from his brother saying that he had decided to return to Korea again. Jae-heon quickly typed a response and set the phone aside. He sat back down on the couch and tossed his phone aside. Thoughts immediately swarmed in his head about why this had to happen right now. He tiredly rubbed his head and pushed his hair back. Then he smirked and cursed. He decided that he would have to hurry and carry out his plan sooner. The evening had been full of events, and although he was tired, there was still much he needed to think about. The next day, Jung Eun-gyo tried to make herself an espresso with a lot of sugar, hoping to relieve her hangover, even just a little. Kim Hae-da took the cup from her and started mixing the contents with water. He scolded her, saying he thought she was just in a bad mood, but now he realized she had a hangover. The guy told her that if she drank it, she'd only feel worse. Then he told her that she'd be better off having some bean sprout soup. Hae-da asked when she even had time to get drunk and if she drank by herself. But the girl turned around and said that she refused to be interrogated and would rather rest. The guy suggested that she take the day off entirely, but she replied that she would need a day off tomorrow. She entered the kitchen, and once left alone, she wearily slid down, exhaling heavily. Eun-gyo covered her burning face with her hands, trying to convince herself to stop thinking about what had happened the night before. But it was driving her crazy. After they parted ways yesterday, she had gone to Lee Jae-heon's workshop for one simple reason, without suspecting anything. When he left, the girl had already finished cleaning up when suddenly she heard a warning on the TV about an unusually hot night. She thought that since he had come so late to return her diary, she could lend him the fan as a thank you, especially since there was no air conditioning in the basement, and he had stayed there again because of her. She was about to call him, but then realized that she didn't have his phone number. Driven by alcohol and anxiety, the girl decided to go down to him and ask if he needed any help. That was the reason why last night she decided to go down to the guy in the basement. Eun-gyo hesitated at the door, wondering if she was overthinking it and if he might see it as rude. In the end, she decided to quickly ask him and then go to bed. After the girl knocked several times but got no response, she thought that maybe he had left by taxi. She decided to check and grabbed the door handle. To her surprise, the door opened easily. The girl was taken aback and peered through the crack in the door. What she saw made her freeze. Her eyes widened in shock and disbelief, and her ears rang with the sound of her accelerated heartbeat. She caught Lee Jae-heon in quite an awkward moment and couldn't tear her eyes away from him. His face was flushed, and the veins on his arms and neck were bulging. The girl was so absorbed in watching that her legs felt as if they were glued to the floor. Now, she thought that she should have left immediately because when you barge into someone's space without asking, you inevitably have to pay a high price for it. She was about to quietly close the door when she heard the guy desperately utter her name. Her heart skipped a beat, and she froze, like a statue unable to move. Now she lazily stirred the ice cubes in her glass of coffee, pondering that Lee Jae-heon was an adult with his own private life, one she had no right to interfere with. Fortunately, he was so occupied that he didn't notice her. She suddenly thought that he was handsome, especially when he smiled, but at that moment he looked particularly charming. Jung Eun-gyo was once again burning with embarrassment. She felt hopeless. She was curious about why he had said her name. Suddenly, she heard the voices of some young people discussing how Jae-heon wasn't there and the workshop was closed, so they would have some dessert and then move on. The girl peeked out from the kitchen. He'd noticed her and asked her to bring out the cake while he made coffee for the guests. The guy said that these were the friends of their tenant, but he wasn't here today. He suggested that it must be hard for him to work in this heat without air conditioning. The girl just nodded and said that it was probably true. She served the cake to the young people, thinking to herself that she was lucky she wouldn't run into Lee Jae-heon today, as after what happened yesterday, she wasn't sure how to look him in the eye. She lazily flipped through the pages of her diary, thinking that if it hadn't been for that, nothing would have happened. But she hoped that at least she would find a worthwhile idea in it. Suddenly, she froze on a page with the notes that the guy had quoted the previous evening. She ran her fingertip over the sentences, thinking about what she had felt when writing them. They say that scribbles reflect true instincts and the unembellished subconscious. The girl couldn't understand what she had subconsciously desired so much in the past. Her thoughts were interrupted by Kim Hae-da. He said he had selected 5 resumes from candidates for a part-time job and asked the girl to choose one, since she would be spending a lot of time with that person. Jae-hyun stepped out of the office when he suddenly heard someone calling his name. He glanced indifferently toward the source of the sound. It was Jung Eun-gyo. He friendly asked if Jae-hyun had met with the professor, and Jae-hyun replied that he had just been to a consultation. Jae-hyun asked what he was doing here, and the guy replied that he had also come to see the professor. Then, he thanked Jae-hyun for his involvement in their project and said that the short film was going to be a huge success. He patted Jae-hyun on the shoulder, and the guy, hiding his discomfort, looked at his hand. Meanwhile, Seong-gun thanked him for recommending such a talented writer and invited them to the premiere in a month. Seong-gun said that it was the best decision to hire Jung Eun-gyo and asked how Jae-hyun knew her in the first place. The guy smiled and replied that he had recently read her book and immediately thought of her when he found out they were looking for a writer. He asked him not to tell the girl that it was him who had recommended her, as he thought she would feel indebted to him. Seong-gun replied that, judging by her personality, that would indeed be the case, and agreed to keep quiet. When the guy had walked far enough away, Lee Jae-heon brushed off his shoulder as if there were dirt on it, and muttered that the guy should be grateful and indebted to Jung Eun-gyo. If he hadn't needed to arrange a meeting with her in such a way, he would have never agreed to something like this in his life. Jung Eun-gyo was, as usual, working hard, sweat on her brow. It was unbearably hot outside, and the girl thought about how much hotter it would be in the peak of summer. Kim Hae-da had gone out to handle a delivery, so she was alone in the cafe. She thought to herself that they needed to install an air conditioner in the basement as soon as possible. For the past few days, Jae-hyun hadn't shown up at the studio, and the girl thought it was for the best, as the events of that night still haunted her. She didn't want to think about it and decided to focus on her work while there were no customers around. She opened her laptop and skimmed through her notes. The basic outline of the synopsis was ready, but she still had a lot to write. The girl tapped her fingers on the keyboard and thought that since she would soon have an assistant working with her, she would have more time to write a new manuscript. She found something in her old notes that inspired her. She wasn't sure if the story would appeal to a wide audience, but she liked the idea and was eager to write it. For the first time in a long while, Eun-gyo felt a thrill while writing. Although it was her main job, lately she had been focusing more on her work at the cafe, and because of that, she had been getting very tired. Suddenly, 2 men walked into the cafe, talking loudly and casually. Eun-gyo immediately stood up and greeted them. One of the men immediately started acting rudely, demanding that the music be switched. Eun-gyo maintained her calm and kept a smile on her face, though inwardly she thought to herself that she was unlucky with the customers. The men sat down at the table, and one of them began loudly banging on it, demanding a menu. Eun-gyo smelled a strong scent of alcohol and politely asked the man to come up to the counter to place his order. The man slouched arrogantly and began being rude to her, saying that there were no other customers anyway, and demanding that she come to them. Eun-gyo continued to remain calm and politely asked him once again to approach the counter to place his order. She turned toward the counter when something small flew at her and lightly hit her in the head. Behind her, a bold male voice demanded that she come over to them. The girl took a deep breath and tried to convince herself to be patient, reminding herself to stay composed and serve them politely. The girl bent down to grab the card that had been thrown at her and decided to quickly take their order, as it was better not to argue with people like that. Behind her, she heard chuckles, and one of the men said that he liked obedient girls, but it was a shame that her figure wasn't all that great. They ordered 2 coffees, and then one of the men said that he had changed his mind and wouldn't pay that much for their crappy coffee. Eun-gyo pressed her lips together and walked toward the counter, thinking to herself that these men were acting this way only because she was alone. If Kim Hae-da had been with her, they wouldn't have dared to behave so rudely. Eun-gyo thought to herself that running her own business wasn't easy. She didn't notice how a tall male figure appeared behind her. Lee Jae-heon reached out and carefully took the card from her hands, which belonged to the rude man. The girl turned around and stared at him in surprise. The guy calmly asked her to lend him her apron. Before she could understand what was happening, the guy gently tugged at the straps of the apron and started to take it off her. The man was sitting casually and talking to his friend. Lee Jae-heon approached their table and loomed over them like a mountain. He looked at the rude man and said in a calm tone, telling him to move his feet. Then he calmly placed the card on the table and asked them to approach the counter and place their order. The man immediately began apologizing for his behavior and making excuses. His friend, surprised, remarked that such a young guy was already the cafe owner. But the guy replied that he was just an employee and that the girl was the owner. The men immediately began apologizing and saying they hoped she wasn't upset with them. One of the men immediately started scolding his drunk companion for his inappropriate behavior, and then they both stood up and said they would rather go to another cafe. After seeing off the troublesome customers, Jae-heon approached the girl and said that he was on his way to the workshop when he saw one of the men throw a card at her. He asked if she was okay. Eun-gyo replied that she was fine. The guy handed her the apron and said that the behavior of that man had really pissed him off, adding that men like him were probably terrible husbands and fathers. The girl thanked him for his help and was surprised by the satisfied look on his face as he said all of it. She started putting on her apron and thought to herself that, although he used a lot of swear words in his speech, his voice sounded very pleasant and beautiful, and it didn't irritate her at all. She was fiddling with the ties when suddenly Jae-heon reached his hands behind her back. The girl found herself surrounded by his arms, their fingers briefly touching. Calmly, he helped her with the ties and asked why the apron was so small. Jung Eun-gyo pressed against his chest, and his scent once again made her head spin. She grumbled, saying that it wasn't the apron that was small, but the guy who was large. He smirked and then asked if problematic customers like that often came to the cafe. Their fingers continued to tangle between each other and the apron ties, and the guy said that she shouldn't stay alone in the cafe. The girl blushed and replied that they had already hired an assistant, and Jae-heon was surprised by this. He finally removed his hands from around her, and the girl wondered why she always felt so tense when he was near, and why he behaved with her in such a way. The guy looked at her carefully and noticed a faint blush on her cheeks. He asked if she had a fever. She was surprised and replied that she felt perfectly fine. Then he smiled smugly and asked if she had really turned red because of him. Then he touched her already red cheek. This made Eun-gyo blush even more, and her heartbeat quickened. She became flustered and couldn't understand why he kept doing things like this. Suddenly, Kim Hae-da entered the cafe, loudly announcing that he was back. When he noticed Jae-heon, he tensed and asked, "What's going on?" He noticed the blushing girl and asked if something had happened to her. She hesitated and replied that they had just had some troublesome customers. She said that Lee Jae-heon helped her, and if it weren't for him, she would definitely have ended up at the police station. Hae-da tensed up and said he would definitely review the security footage. The girl walked behind the counter and asked Jae-heon if he had already arranged the workshop. He replied that he couldn't set up the furniture yet because it was so stuffy in there. The girl told him that the air conditioner should be installed in a few days. Kim Hae-da picked up the tablet and stared intently at the footage from the security cameras. Meanwhile, Eun-gyo told him that the guy could borrow a fan for now, and he agreed, saying he would come by later to get it. And then suddenly, Kim Hae-da shouted, "How dare that bastard throw a card at the girl?" He asked if she was hurt and said she shouldn't have picked it up and agreed to serve them. Jae-heon silently watched as Eun-gyo tried to calm her friend, telling him that everything was fine. The guy offered him coffee as a thank you, but he declined, saying that he had to go. He then told the girl that he'd stop by later. Kim Hae-da suspiciously watched him leave, while the girl tiredly covered her face with her hands and let out a heavy sigh. Then suddenly she turned to her friend and asked if she should meet someone. He stared at her in surprise and asked why she brought up such a conversation, wondering if she was feeling lonely. She said that she just wanted to meet someone and asked him to find a guy for her. Kim Hae-da irritably turned around and said that he wouldn't do that, and that there was no one in his circle who would be suitable for her. The guy irritably said that he wouldn't leave her alone in the cafe anymore, as various scoundrels seemed to be lurking around every day. At that moment, the image of the smugly grinning Lee Jae-heon appeared before his eyes. The workday was over, and Eun-gyo closed the cafe, preparing to head upstairs to her apartment. At that moment, Lee Jae-heon emerged from the basement and was surprised to see her returning home so late, as the cafe had already been closed for some time. Eun-gyo replied that she had been busy cleaning up and then asked why he was still in the workshop. The guy was all sweaty, and with a smile, he replied that he was just about to come up to her for the fan. They went up to her apartment, and the girl said that she actually had a brand new fan and could give it to him as a gift. Jung Eun-gyo opened the door, and the guy stepped inside after her. She felt a strange flutter in her chest as it was the second time she had allowed him into her home. She felt a wave of anxiety and realized that she couldn't deny the fact that she liked this guy, and the thought was driving her crazy. These complicated feelings were like a flutter in her chest, and the biggest problem was that she wasn't against it at all. She entered the room and noticed that the guy stood in the doorway. She told him not to be shy and come in, but Jae-hyun replied that he got dirty while working and didn't want to make a mess in her place. Then she pointed to the storage closet and said she would go get the fan and be right back. She was relieved to realize that it wasn't romantic excitement. She liked his voice and appearance, but his character was too unpleasant. She felt attracted to him, but it wasn't the same as falling in love with someone. Entering the storage room, the girl let out a resigned sigh. The room was filled with boxes and various clutter. She looked around for the right box, noting how much she had cluttered the room. Suddenly, she heard a guy's voice behind her asking if she needed help. Finally, the girl noticed the box, in which she knew for sure the fan was kept. It was placed quite high. Lee Jae-heon approached her and asked how she was planning to reach it by herself from such a height. Then, suddenly, he stepped up close to her and said that he would get it himself. In that moment, his chest brushed against the girl's head, and it felt as though an electric shock ran through her body. Eun-gyo jerked suddenly and accidentally pushed the guy, almost losing her balance, but she felt his strong hand wrap around her waist, steadying her. For a few moments, they stood embraced in such a way that she could feel the warmth of his hand through the thin fabric of her clothes. Then the guy reached for the box again and, apologizing, asked if she was okay. With a flushed face, the girl replied that she was fine. Finally, he got the box and, holding it above his head, said that it would be awkward to turn around with it, so he would have to move backward. The girl said she would help him so he wouldn't trip. She guided him with where to step so he wouldn't knock anything over or trip. Lowering her head, the girl tried to pull herself together and scolded herself for trembling in front of him like a schoolgirl. Being so close to him, she could smell his scent again and mentally scolded herself for not being able to play the fool and pretend she didn't sense the tension between them. It didn't matter whether these feelings were caused by affection or desire. Acting on them recklessly was dangerous. Finally, they left the storage room, and the guy placed the box on the floor in front of him. Then he asked if he could ask her a question. The girl asked what he was curious about. He smiled and, looking at her in a strange way, asked if she was always this kind with everyone. He said that it could cause her trouble if she behaved like that with everyone. The girl looked at him in confusion, thinking that he was acting strange again. She wondered if he really thought she was easy. She was not the type of person to fall for such a provocation, so she smiled and asked if neighbors weren't supposed to help each other. Then she looked at him kindly and said that if she considered him as a man, she would never let him into her apartment. The guy didn't get flustered and didn't show it, deciding to continue their little game. He smiled and said that neighborly help was truly wonderful. Eun-gyo continued to maintain a mask of friendliness on her face and said that he could use her bathroom if he wanted to take a shower. She thought to herself that this way, she would definitely make it clear that he didn't affect her in any way. Jae-hyun didn't reply, but as he was heading toward the door, he suddenly said that he had met Jung Eun-gyo at the university and that he had told him the video turned out just great. He said that the preview would be in a month and that they had both been invited. The girl got excited and said that she really wanted to attend the event. After seeing him off, she wished him a good evening, but he suddenly stopped her. He said that he would come to take a shower since she had been so kind to invite him. Eun-gyo forced a smile, not expecting him to take her offer seriously. The guy, however, said that he had planned to set up a shower in the basement, but since she was so kind, he would come to her place. The girl thought to herself that he never got tired of playing his games and replied that there was no problem. Then, with a smirk, the guy said that they were just neighbors who help each other. The girl froze, hearing him use her own words, and Jae-hyun nodded at her as a farewell before leaving. After closing the door behind him, she stood there for a while, staring blankly at one spot. Then, She slapped her forehead with her hand and decided that she had definitely lost her mind. She blushed and thought about how that jerk had smiled in a way that made it clear he understood everything. Lee Jae-heon, pleased with himself, went down to the basement. After a while, an additional staff member started working at the cafe, and the girl felt relieved as she was able to delegate some of her duties to him. She was pleased with him. He had only been working for a few days, but he was doing a great job and was quite friendly. The only thing that slightly tired her was that the guy was chatty. Tired of his constant talking, the girl sighed, and at that moment, Kim Hae-da walked into the cafe. The girl greeted him, but the guy walked past without responding. He only asked if it was true that she wanted him to introduce her to someone. She was surprised by his coldness and asked him again. Hae-da repeated his question, asking if she wanted to meet some guy, and said he would send her a few photos so she could choose which one she liked more. His behavior was unusual, so Eun-gyo followed him, asking if everything was okay. Then she smelled the alcohol and asked if he was hungover. The guy replied irritably that nothing had happened. The new employee, being an avid gossip, watched and eavesdropped on their conversation with great interest. Jung Eun-gyo said that he looked unwell, and the guy replied that he would go up to her apartment and rest for a while. The girl nodded in approval. She was very surprised. As usually, he was hard to get rid of at work, but here he was, showing up with a hangover. The guy said he would go and arrange the goods in the storage room, and the girl replied that there were no customers anyway. In the next moment, the girl's phone rang with a new message, and she decided to check who was texting her. When she unlocked the phone, her heart skipped a beat, and her eyes widened in shock. It was just a promotional email, but suddenly Eun-gyo noticed that her ex's account had become active again. She was surprised because he had blocked it as soon as they broke up. So, why did he suddenly reappear? Could it be that Lee Do-yeon has returned to the country? Or is there a new owner of his number? But none of that mattered anymore. She decided to treat his number the same way she did with the stuff in the basement. She finally deleted it without any regrets. Soon, Seon-tae returned and said that they were installing an air conditioner in the basement, which was, of course, a necessity in such hot weather. The girl asked him to make 3 iced Americanos so she could bring them to the workers to cool down. Suddenly, the guy asked if it was true that she and Kim Hae-da were good friends. She replied that it was true. They were not only good friends, but also business partners. The guy then asked if there was anything romantic between them, since there were many rumors going around. Eun-gyo smiled and said that they were almost like brother and sister, and that was all. The girl grabbed the cup holders and hurried down to the basement to avoid answering Seon-tae's questions, knowing full well that he was a terrible gossip. As she descended the stairs, she saw Jae-heon standing in the hallway, watching the workers. It was the first time she had seen him since the day he promised to come over to take a shower. Since that conversation, the guy had only been coming to the workshop, never stopping by the cafe or her home. Suddenly, the guy turned around and, flashing a charming smile, greeted her. It seemed like he lit up with happiness at the sight of her. Eun-gyo blushed a little and said that she decided to bring him and the workers some refreshing drinks. The guy gratefully accepted them. He said that now he could return the fan to her, to which the girl replied that if he no longer needed it, he could bring it to her house. But it would be better to do it in the evening since Hae-da was sleeping at her place right now. The guy tensed up and asked why Hae-da was sleeping at her place, to which the girl simply replied that he had a hangover and she had allowed him to sleep it off. She noticed his strange look and said that it was time for her to get back to work. Suddenly, she felt a confident yet gentle grip on her arm. She turned around and saw the smiling guy. He asked her to come by his workshop in the evening, saying that he had made something especially for her. For a few moments, she stared at him in surprise, and he didn't let go of her hand until she agreed. The evening came, and Kim Hae-da invited the guys to dinner, saying he was treating them for their hard work. Seon-tae was excited, but Eun-gyo declined, saying she needed to work on a manuscript and would just go to bed afterwards. Her friend found it suspicious, but the girl wished them a good evening and quickly escorted them out. She waited until the guys were out of sight and hurried to head down to the basement. If Jae-heon had bought something for her, she would have declined. But since it was a handmade gift, she felt uncomfortable refusing it. Plus, she was burning with curiosity about what it could be. She knocked on the door from which music was coming, but hesitated to enter without asking, not wanting to walk in on him half naked again. Jae-heon heard the knock on the door, and when no one entered, he decided to approach and open it himself. He smiled at the girl and invited her in. She said that she wasn't staying long. He asked if she was planning to have dinner, and the girl replied that she would just have some ramen and go to sleep. Suddenly, she stopped and looked around. Then she complimented how well he had arranged everything, saying that the workshop looked wonderful, almost unrecognizable. She curiously looked around and asked what the device was. The guy replied that he had bought a new 3D printer and was actually thinking about what to print first. He confessed that she was the first person he thought of, so he made something specially for her. In the next moment, he handed her a small, transparent rabbit, inside of which, in the shape of a blue wave, was an image of his heart. Eun-gyo was mesmerized by the beauty of it and could only utter that it was a rabbit. The guy smiled and said that it was a paperweight for books. He mentioned that he remembered how many books she had, so he decided to make something like this for her. The girl stared in awe at the perfectly shaped animal, feeling warmth spreading inside her. Could it be because she hadn't received any gifts in a long time? She lifted her eyes to the guy and sincerely thanked him, admitting that she was very happy with his gift. Seeing her reaction, Jae-heon broke into a smile and said that she had helped him many times, so he wanted to show his gratitude. The girl said it was nothing, as he had driven away the rude guys for her, and even though she had offered, he still hadn't used the shower. Then the guy suddenly said that he was actually planning to come to the shower today. The girl immediately scolded herself for her loose tongue. Noticing how she hesitated, he smirked and asked if those were just empty words, or if the director was still at her place. The girl forced a smile, thinking that he was teasing her again, and replied that he could come whenever he needed to, and that Kim Hae-da had already left. He smirked and said that, in that case, he would take off his apron now and go with her. Eun-gyo blushed and couldn't believe he was actually going to come to her house to take a shower. The images painted by her imagination made her heart race faster. She watched as he took off his apron, noticing how broad his back was, and couldn't believe he was acting so nonchalantly. She suddenly shifted her gaze to the boxes and said that it seemed like he still had some unpacking to do. The guy replied that these were samples of test prints. She became curious and tried to peek inside, asking what was in there. Something similar to her rabbit? But she froze when she heard Jae-heon say that the guys had come over and printed some of their body parts, then smirked. He said that there was also his own example in there, but he wouldn't show it to her, clearly enjoying how flustered she had become. Eun-gyo immediately jumped away from the boxes and said that it couldn't be possible for grown men to be doing such nonsense. The guy walked over and said that they had really printed it on the 3D printer, but it was just a joke. Then he looked at the girl and with a slight smile said that if she was interested, he could give her one of the examples. Eun-gyo, already burning with embarrassment, shook her head frantically and was on the verge of tears from the shame. The guy smirked and suggested they head upstairs so he could take a shower. While the sound of water could be heard from behind the door, the girl found a place to put the gift from Jae-heon. The little rabbit settled on the nightstand among the books. Eun-gyo continued to carefully examine it. It was transparent and harmless on the outside, but its heart, shaped like a wave, symbolized the raging ocean inside. She thought that the rabbit looked very harmonious with the cover of her book, and suddenly realized that this was the first time someone had made her a handmade gift. Suddenly, her phone notified her of a new message. Hae-da sent her several photos of guys and asked her to choose who she liked the most. She was surprised that he suddenly agreed to introduce her to someone. He sent her 5 photos of different guys, but to her disappointment, she realized that they all looked like her ex. She tried to write to her friend about it, unable to understand why he thought she was looking for someone similar to Do-hyun. Then she stopped and thought that maybe he assumed she had asked him to introduce her to someone just because she still hadn't gotten over her ex. While she was pondering what to reply to Hae-da, Jae-heon appeared behind her, took her phone, and, surprised, asked why she needed so many photos of guys. Seeing the conversation with her friend, the guy noticeably tensed up and felt a pang of jealousy, but still asked who all these guys were and why she needed them. The girl immediately pulled back and said that she was just considering options for people to meet, and that it really wasn't any of his business. The guy noticeably frowned and stepped back. Eun-gyo said that looking through someone else's phone was rude. Jae-heon sat down on the couch and, smiling, said that he didn't think she was the type of person who could easily start a relationship with anyone. He thought that such things wouldn't interest her. The girl replied that relationships weren't the point, and that people could simply enjoy spending time together. Then the guy interrupted her, smirking, and said that it sounded more like friends with benefits. He said that it was certainly convenient to have such a friend when both were okay with it, but it was strange to call it any kind of relationship. The girl grabbed her head, regretting ever starting such a conversation with him. Eun-gyo placed a pot of water on the stove and said that he was thinking too extreme. She explained that nowadays it's perfectly normal to first see if you're physically compatible with someone, and only then consider building any kind of relationship with them. He listened to her attentively, not taking his eyes off her, and noticed the sadness in her voice. He asked if she was really that lonely. Hearing this, the girl froze for a moment, taken aback by how close to the truth he had gotten. She sighed and said that perhaps it was true. Jae-hyun was surprised to hear such an honest answer, in which he could hear the pain and sadness. Suddenly, he stood up from the couch and asked if that was why she had invited him over under the pretext of taking a shower. The girl froze in surprise and said that she had no idea what he was talking about. The guy slowly approached her and said that she knew what kind of person he really was, and yet she still treated him well. So why? He ended up behind her, trapping her between himself and the countertop, and whispered softly in her ear, "Maybe she saw something that night." He could almost hear her heart pounding, and leaning in closer, he continued to whisper that he had fallen for her at first sight. He ran his palm over her hand, and she felt a shiver run through her body. But despite his gentle movements and relaxed voice, she couldn't hear a single ounce of sincerity in his words. Drops of water were still dripping from his wet hair as he continued softly, saying that if she had gone on a blind date with him, he would have surely won her over on the very first evening. Eun-gyo was outraged and tried to break free from his hold, telling him to stop saying such things. The guy smiled slightly and asked, if she was planning to find someone, why not let them be those special friends instead? The girl froze in surprise, and taking advantage of the moment, the guy gently grasped her chin and said that perhaps they could start right now. In the next moment, he turned her towards him and kissed her. Eun-gyo initially responded to the kiss, but then suddenly pushed him away and asked why he did that so suddenly. But the guy simply pulled her back to him. He hugged her and kissed her again. This time she didn't resist. Her cheeks burned, and she could feel his breath as he whispered that she had said she wanted something light, that she just needed sympathy to start with. He traced his finger along her lower lip, looking into her eyes, and said that if she didn't want to see him lose his mind, she should agree. And it was the first time she heard desperation in his voice. Eun-gyo couldn't find the words to respond, and his lips touched hers once more. Then the guy pulled away and playfully pinched her blushing cheek. His eyes grew hazy, and he felt it was becoming increasingly difficult to hold himself back. But he couldn't allow himself to act on his feelings now, so he resignedly dropped his head onto the girl's shoulder. They stood like that for a few moments as the guy took deep breaths, trying to calm himself and steady his breathing. Then, quietly, he confessed that he really liked her. In the next moment, he stepped away from her and said that it was time for him to go. Eun-gyo stood there, flustered, not understanding what the hell was going on. Jae-hyun suddenly felt something small and soft hit him in the back. He turned around because the girl threw a rag at him and screamed that he was right and that she had seen everything. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart pounding wildly, and confessed that she had caught him at that moment and heard him whisper her name. And that was exactly why she wanted to find someone, to avoid giving in to the attempts of this young guy to seduce her. That's why she warned him not to act impulsively and to never kiss her without asking again. Jae-hyun was surprised by her tirade, but then a smirk spread across his face. To her surprise, the guy started approaching her again and said that since she knew about his intentions, maybe she would give in just once, or at least hint at her preferences. He stood in front of her, extending his hand to turn off the boiling water. Leaning towards her ear, he whispered that otherwise he would do things his way, and that there was no need for her to look for anyone else, since there was already a man just within arm's reach. Eun-gyo sat on the bed, hugging herself, lost in thought about how the guy, after everything that had been said, simply left. She looked at the gift from him and thought about how she couldn't understand him at all. She couldn't deny that he was a handsome man, and her heart fluttered when she was near him. But whether it was love or just simple desire, she didn't know. Moreover, she didn't believe that he could have fallen in love with her in such a short time. But the girl kept thinking about him, even though it was the last thing she needed right now. She picked up her phone to check her schedule and was surprised to see a missed call from her professor. She wondered when she could have possibly missed the call. She then remembered how Jae-heon had cornered her by the stove. The professor had sent her a message suggesting she give lectures several times a week. And although he had been very helpful to her during her studies, he had often pushed her to the point of tears. So she wasn't sure whether it was a good idea to get involved with him again. The next day, it was raining outside, but Jae-hyun went for a run because he wanted to clear his head. Returning home, he took off his soaked clothes and headed for a hot shower. He replayed the events of the previous evening in his mind, growing angry over the fact that the girl had allowed Haida to sleep in her house. Because of that, he couldn't control himself and gave in to the impulse. He had been trying so hard to keep himself in check, but as soon as he imagined any other man being close to her, he lost his composure. Then he remembered her flushed cheeks and glazed gaze, and he felt like he was done for. Her image in his mind made his blood rush faster, and he couldn't help but fantasize about what he could do. He remembered seeing Jung Eun-gyo many years ago, her smile and her sparkling eyes. So he slammed his fist into the wall with force, allowing the streams of water to wash away the traces of his tension. Stepping out of the shower, he reflected that he had definitely lost his mind because of her. Although he had fallen for her 10 years ago, she hadn't changed at all, but he had become a completely different person. She wouldn't even recognize him now. Suddenly, he was distracted by the sound of a message notification on his phone. His father, in his usual condescending manner, wrote to him about sending a new car in honor of his upcoming birthday and hoped that his son would want to meet with him and spend some time together. Jae-heon disliked that his father still hadn't accepted his decision to live with his mother after the divorce and change his last name. The constant pressure and disapproval from his father only deepened the distance between them. Although his mother's second marriage gave him a stepbrother, Jae-heon suddenly remembered Eun-gyo and how she had figured out his plans regarding her. He wasn't upset. On the contrary, he was glad that she had finally paid attention to him. It was still pouring rain outside, and the girl kept wiping the floor from the wet streaks. Moreover, there were many visitors, as a lot of people were seeking shelter from the rain. Suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, the girl saw Jae-heon entering the cafe. She decided that after yesterday, they couldn't avoid each other anymore and made up her mind to talk to him. But to her surprise, the girls at the table, seeing him, started calling him over. The guy glanced at her briefly and greeted her, but she blushed and decided to talk to him later. She returned to the counter where Seon-tae immediately started guessing which of those girls was dating the owner of the workshop. The guy continued gossiping tirelessly about how sweet Jae-heon was with them, and how one of the girls was definitely looking at him with a lovesick gaze. Eun-gyo didn't want to admit it, but it was uncomfortable for her to hear all these assumptions. She tried to avoid further developing the topic with her colleague. Meanwhile, Jae-heon approached the counter, handing over his card to order coffee. But suddenly, Haeda appeared, with a strained smile as he said that they had promised him one free coffee per day. He took the card and mentioned that he would bring the coffee soon. Jae-heon also gave a strained smile in response and said that, as a pastry chef, he shouldn't trouble himself with such things, and that he should let the other staff handle it. Eun-gyo watched the veiled exchange between them with tension, as if they were children in a sandbox fighting over a toy. Finally, she snatched the card and said she would make the coffee, asking Haeda to prepare a piece of cake for him. Suddenly, Seon-tae spoke up, saying that the guy could enjoy the cake with his girlfriend. He added that he and Eun-gyo had just been talking about how good they looked together. Upon hearing this, the girl could only let out a heavy sigh. Jae-heon tensed up and, turning to her, asked what exactly they had been talking about. She looked up at him and said that she simply suggested he eat the cake. The guy narrowed his eyes at her and asked with whom exactly they were suggesting he do that. Jae-heon shot Seon-tae a murderous glare, making the guy immediately apologize and say that he must have simply made a mistake. The girl tried to smooth things over and said that since his friends had been waiting for him for quite a while, she simply decided to treat them to something sweet. Nothing more. The guy just smirked, nodded his head, and walked away. Eun-gyo turned to Haeda and said that she had looked through all the photos he had sent her. She then asked if the man in the third photo was a good person. Haeda replied that, as a friend, yes, but when it came to relationships, only time would tell. The girl watched the guy, observing how he smiled and chatted with the girls at the table. Then she said she would try meeting the guy once, and Haeda responded somewhat vaguely, saying that in that case, he would arrange it. She grabbed the tray and said she would take the order. Seon-tae, noticing the tension between the two friends, wondered what had happened between them. Approaching the table, Eun-gyo placed the coffee and treats down. The girls thanked her cheerfully, their faces lighting up with smiles. One of the girls, quite charming, asked the guy if he would show them his workshop afterward. Leaving, Eun-gyo noticed how the guy stood up and offered the girls to go with him to the workshop. And she thought to herself that they were younger and more beautiful than she was. After they left, the girl thought to herself that no matter how she looked at it, she wasn't their equal. Seon-tae suggested having a corporate dinner since the weather was bad, but Kim Haeda replied that in such weather, neither he nor Eun-gyo are usually in the mood. The guy turned to the girl and asked if that was why she was so gloomy, and she replied that he was right. It was because of the weather. The evening arrived, the cafe closed, and the girl watched the continuing downpour. She decided to stay and work a bit on the manuscript, especially since sometimes the gloomy mood gave her inspiration. Suddenly, she noticed that Lee Jae-heon's car was still parked outside the cafe. This meant he hadn't gone home yet. She lowered her head and scolded herself for once again letting her thoughts return to him. She started typing the text, thinking that although asking Haeda for a blind date had been impulsive, it was something she needed in order to figure out what she truly felt for Jae-heon. She decided that if the flutter she felt when Lee Jae-heon was near could be felt with another man, it would mean she was simply yearning for warmth. So she would definitely know whether she was drawn to him because of loneliness or if there was truly something between them. Soon, the girl stretched tiredly but contentedly. She had sent part of her manuscript to the publisher. They had hired a part-time worker at the cafe, and she had agreed to give lectures, so she would soon need to meet with the professor. The quiet knock pulled her out of her thoughts. When she turned her attention to it, she saw Lee Jae-heon standing outside the door. He stood outside the door, signaling for the girl to let him in. The girl hesitated to open the door, but seeing that he wasn't leaving, she decided to step out and said that the cafe was already closed. The guy slipped past her and said that he hadn't come for coffee. He walked inside, and the girl asked why he had come and where his friends were. He sat down at a table and replied that he had no idea where they were. The girl sat down across from him, sighing as she thought about how this guy didn't even try to hide his true nature from her. The guy asked how her day went, and Eun-gyo told him that because of the rainy weather, there were many visitors. On top of that, she always felt more exhausted in such weather. Jae-hyun suddenly asked if she had been feeling lonely. The girl closed her laptop and said that he was flirting too clumsily, and that maybe such a thing worked on younger girls. The guy replied without hesitation that he didn't know about their preferences, as he had never been interested in anyone like that. Eun-gyo didn't believe him, but out loud she said that she wasn't going to date him because he was too young for her, and advised him to find a girlfriend among his peers. The guy smirked and asked if the only problem was his age. The girl replied that relationships with younger guys were too burdensome. Jae-hyun said that he never suggested getting into a relationship, so he didn't understand what burden she was talking about. He asked if she was perhaps flustered by his confession that he liked her. He then added that she was very cute. In the next moment, he leaned forward, never taking his eyes off her, and said that she herself had said she was looking for something casual. But now that he had played along, she seemed to be scared. Eun-gyo stared at him intently, her heart pounding fiercely, but not out of fear. Quite the opposite. She couldn't understand why he was so determined to pursue her. She reached out to him with her hand and touched his soft lips, wondering what it was about her that attracted him so strongly. Was she truly his type? Or was it just simple curiosity? He smirked as she unconsciously ran her finger over his lips, sensing the shift in the air between them. Feeling her hand move to the back of his neck, the guy leaned in, closing the distance between them, ready to kiss her. And just as their lips were about to touch, the girl suddenly covered his lips with her hand and said that there were security cameras in the cafe. She said that as the director, it was unacceptable for her if anyone saw something like that. With a sigh, the guy sat back down in his seat. He quickly wrote his phone number on a piece of paper and handed it to the girl, asking her to save it since they were already so close. He stood up from the table and said that it would be better for her to go home now, as it wasn't safe for her to be alone at work so late. As he was leaving, he also mentioned that if she wanted, she could come down to his workshop. Eun-gyo stared at the numbers on the piece of paper, contemplating how she couldn't go to him after everything that had happened. She closed her laptop, feeling utterly exhausted, and decided to get some rest. On her way, she threw the piece of paper with the guy's phone number into the trash, as she didn't want to save it. She didn't want to create additional points of contact by exchanging messages. She lay down on the couch in the break room on the first floor, but felt so exhausted that she thought it would be better to go up to her place. The girl felt her eyes closing, but she was still thinking about why she had acted that way. The last thing she remembered before falling asleep was the guy's face and the thought that she might not have uncovered all the masks he wore. Under the sound of rain outside the window, the girl drifted into sleep. Jae-hyun stood in the middle of the workshop, wondering whether the girl would show up or not. He thought that even though he had invited her, he knew she wasn't ready to take such a step yet. The guy threw on his work apron and recalled how 10 years ago the girl had pounded on the doors of their house. One day, on his way home, he saw the girl standing at the gates of his father's house, the professor's house. She was desperately trying to get inside. The girl was frantically wiping away her tears, pleading with the professor to let her in. He knew that if she was allowed to come to his house, it meant she was a capable student, but his father had a repulsive character. He knew that his father enjoyed pushing his students with demanding tasks, something he had seen quite often. Unable to hold back any longer, he asked her why she was crying so bitterly. At first, it was just idle curiosity, but then the girl wiped her tears, looked at him with reddened eyes, and smiled. To his surprise, he saw a beautiful girl with not a trace of makeup, which was uncommon for girls her age. She was very pretty and sweet. At that moment, he fell hopelessly in love with her, so deeply that he could think of nothing else. All his thoughts were consumed by her, even overshadowing the struggles of adolescence. Jung Eun-gyo came to his father's house almost every day, enduring all his demands and insults. So the boy tried to visit his father more often, just to see her more often. A few months later, the girl suddenly stopped coming, and his parents' relationship deteriorated to the point of divorce. The boy decided to stay with his mother, so he could no longer see her, only occasionally gazing at her photograph. The boy thought he would eventually forget his first silly crush, as it usually happens, until one day he met the girl again, but by then she didn't recognize the grown-up Jae-heon. That day, his heart was shattered as she came to his house as the girlfriend of his older stepbrother. Jae-heon realized that despite everything, he still loved her. The guy worked through the night, chiseling the stone, lost in his memories. When he heard the chirping of birds, he couldn't believe it was already morning. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his palm and saw blood oozing out. He had never given up hope of getting back what was once his, and now he wasn't about to surrender. A few days later, Jung Eun-gyo called the girl and told her not to be late for the movie preview. She said she was already getting ready, to which the guy replied that Lee Jae-heon promised to pick her up on the way. He asked if it would be a problem for her, and the girl hesitated before replying that everything was fine. In truth, since the day she had thrown away his phone number, the girl had been trying in every way to avoid meeting him. She left work earlier than usual and didn't leave the house unless it was absolutely necessary. Suddenly, the girl heard the sound of an approaching car and tensed up. Looking out the window, she saw Lee Jae-heon step out of the car and walk toward the cafe. He was dressed in a black suit and looked absolutely stunning. Hearing the sound of heels, the guy looked up. A satisfied smile spread across his face at the sight of Eun-gyo. She was simply enchanting. Approaching him, the girl felt a bit embarrassed and greeted him. The guy smiled and said they hadn't seen each other in a while. The girl thought to herself that this was their first meeting in an entire week and found herself mesmerized as she looked at him. Jae-heon said that he had come to pick her up. He opened the car door for her, and Eun-gyo thought to herself that even if she insisted on going alone, he wouldn't let her go. Before leaving, the young people decided to grab coffee to go. Kim Hae-da handed over 2 cups and warned the girl to be careful. He also told her that he was giving her the day off tomorrow so she could rest. The girl asked what was behind this sudden generosity, but the guy just waved it off nervously and told her to go ahead to the event. She was surprised by his detachment, but Jae-heon hurried her and said that Hyung was already waiting for them. Lee Jae-heon carefully watched his friend's back and suddenly recalled their recent conversation. A week ago, Haida called him in the morning and said that he had checked the security cameras and saw him making advances toward Eun-gyo. He was furious and demanded to know what Jae-heon was doing. Jae-heon flopped onto his bed and told his friend not to yell, insisting that he hadn't done anything wrong. But Kim Hae-da kept shouting, saying that he hadn't given him the basement for a workshop just so he could pull something like this. Jae-heon replied that he perfectly remembered why they had started all of this in the first place, and then drifted into memories of that evening. The guys were sitting in a bar when the conversation turned to Jung Eun-gyo. Her friend said he was tired of seeing her unable to get rid of her ex's things. It had been 2 years already, and it was time for her to move on. Jae-heon asked why he didn't just do it himself, to which he replied that it was important for her to do it on her own and finally let go of her past relationship. Then, Lee Jae-heon said they needed to create a situation where she would have no choice but to throw those things away. Kim Hae-da stared at his friend in confusion. He, smiling, said that he would move in there as a tenant. He said that he was actually looking for a space for a workshop. If he rented their basement, she would have to clear it out, and they could help her if necessary. Hae-da thought it was a good plan, but he was uneasy about Jae-heon being the one to do it since he was the younger brother of her ex-boyfriend. Jae-heon took a sip from his glass and replied that she didn't need to know about it, and he certainly wasn't going to tell her. Jae-heon said that he felt a sense of responsibility because she had been his father's best student, and then her brother had treated her so badly. He wanted her to move on and live happily. The friends decided to put their plan into action. Now, while talking to Haida, the guy asked what his problem was. Everything was going according to plan. The girl had thrown away his brother's things and was moving forward. But Haida said he didn't like how Jae-heon was hovering around her. The guy smirked and said that it's too much to watch the girl through cameras. He mentioned that only Eun-gyo treats him like a friend, while Haida apparently has feelings for her. He smiled and honestly admitted that he had been in love with the girl since their first meeting and had not stopped thinking about her for all these 10 years. So he warned his friend that he was going to get closer to her and win her over. As for Haida, he would have to stay quiet, because he had his chance but missed it. And now all he could do was cherish the friendship that remained between her and him. Jae-hyun said that he had seen the kinds of guys Haida had suggested for her to meet. They all, in one way or another, resembled Lee Jae-hyun, so that she would remember him and those awful feelings, ultimately turning them down. He admitted that it was a pretty sly and underhanded move. The guy threatened him, telling him to stop meddling in their relationship and continue pretending to be a good friend. Jae-hyun heard the short beeps on the other end of the phone and noticed a text message from his father. The man informed him that he had already sent him a car as a gift and invited him and his mother to celebrate his son's birthday together. The guy replied that he would be busy on that day and checked his messenger. Eun-gyo wasn't in his contacts, meaning she hadn't added his number. And so they were driving in his car. Lee Jae-heon suddenly turned to her and said that he realized he had been putting too much pressure on her. He kept his eyes on the road and admitted that he felt insecure because he was younger than her. But when she brought it up, he felt hurt because he had truly fallen for her from the very first meeting. The car stopped at a pedestrian crossing, and the girl asked, "When exactly was this first look?" The guy bitterly smiled and asked, "Does it even matter?" He said that even if she were walking somewhere in the crowd, he would instantly fall in love with her. Eun-gyo blushed at how openly he spoke and replied that he was right, and anyone could fall in love at first sight. She almost blurted out that he had also attracted her on the day of the recording at the studio, but she quickly cleared her throat and apologized for not believing him right away. Lee Jae-heon noticed how the girl's cheeks turned red, and he smiled to himself, thinking how cute it was that she was embarrassed. They arrived at the destination, and as they got out of the car, the guy told the girl to remember the parking spot so she wouldn't get lost later. He walked ahead while Eun-gyo stared at his back, wondering if he planned to give her a ride back as well. Then her gaze drifted lower, and she noticed that his hand was bandaged. She approached him, worried, and asked how he had hurt his hand. The guy looked at his hand, recalling how he had been thinking about her, and replied that he had just gotten distracted while working. The young people were riding in the elevator when the girl finally asked again when he had gotten hurt. Jae-hyun admitted that it happened the night they last saw each other. He waved his injured hand in front of her and said that they had arrived. The girl stood there, thinking. Could it be that he had waited for her all night, hoping that she would come down to him? When they arrived, Seong Eun-hyung greeted them cheerfully. He pointed to their seats and said that after the preview there would be an after-party where they could have fun. Eun-gyo found her seat and, looking around, noticed that a lot of people had come to the preview. She began scanning the room, trying to spot Jae-hyun. She spotted him surrounded by a group of girls. He stood out among them. She thought to herself that he was always the center of attention without even trying. Soon, the guy joined her and said that he didn't expect so many people to come and watch their film. The lights went out, and Eun-gyo confessed that she would like to leave before the movie ended. She didn't want to attract too much attention. The guy smiled and said that in that case, they could escape to a cozy spot. Hearing this, she looked into his eyes, which were glowing in the dim light. The movie was already playing on the screen, and all the girl could hear was the voice of the guy, voicing the words from her script. The very same one who was now not taking his eyes off her. His voice seeped under her skin, stirring her imagination. She blushed and tried to hold herself back. He noticed the way she started trembling. He couldn't even imagine the effect his voice, echoing throughout the cinema hall, had on her. He reached out to take her hand, asking if she was okay, thinking that maybe she was cold. He reached out to take her hand, asking if she was okay, thinking that maybe she was cold. He froze in surprise, but then noticed the girl's red face, her dilated pupils, and heavy breathing. She was looking at him as if in fear, but then he realized what was happening to her. This realization made him reach out and, touching her face, turn her toward him. Feeling his fingers on her face, the girl was struck as if by an electric shock. She was scared they might be seen, but the guy didn't listen to her. He kissed her. She had been holding herself back so much that she bit her lip. The guy tasted the blood and pulled away, smirking. Jung Eun-gyo was stunned and asked why he was behaving so tactlessly with her. She couldn't understand why, time after time, he continued to push her toward impulsive actions, even though she kept rejecting him. The guy intertwined their hands and replied that the way she looked at him was driving him crazy. The girl asked him to calm down, as there were people around. In the next moment, he stood up, a sly smile spreading across his face, and said that in that case, it would be better for them to go to the car, pulling the girl along with him. As they hurried across the parking lot, the girl tried to say that she had been thinking about something, but the guy interrupted her and admitted that on that day in the recording studio, he had also been thinking about something. He admitted that when he was recording the text, she had been looking at him so intently that he thought she had fallen for him, and all he could think about was what he wanted to do with her. The girl listened to him, her cheeks turning red, and her heart beat even faster as she realized how close their thoughts had been. Once they reached the car, he pressed their hands together and asked if she had lost her speech because she had driven the young man crazy. He trapped her again between himself and the car, looming over her as he said she needed to accept it and realize it. The guy lowered his head to her shoulder and, letting out a heavy sigh, said that she had been looking at him with such eyes as if she were enchanted by his voice. She listened to him and her thoughts became tangled. She decided that she had lost her mind just like he had. Eventually, they found themselves in the back seat of his car, and the girl decided there was no point in holding back her emotions any longer. Jae-heon held her tightly in his arms, still not fully believing what was happening. He breathed heavily, burying his face in her neck, and asked if this was all just a dream. Pulling away from her, he looked into her eyes and with a charming smile asked if she might show him some mercy. Just this once. He confessed that he was ready to faithfully come at her every call and always be there when she needed him. She just had to agree. He was willing to be by her side in any role. Eun-gyo watched as he gazed at her with such desire, and the thoughts in her head became increasingly muddled. The girl reached out and gently stroked his face, causing the guy to freeze, feeling such care for the first time. She softly whispered his name and leaned towards him, giving her silent consent. But in the next moment, they both heard their phones vibrate. Someone was persistently looking for both of them. The sound didn't stop, so the girl pulled away from the guy and said that it seemed like they needed to answer. Lee Jae-heon pressed his hands to his eyes, trying to regain his breath, frustrated that they had been interrupted at such an inopportune moment. Getting out of the car, the girl promised that she wouldn't avoid him anymore, but he had to stop acting so recklessly in public. The guy silently placed his hands on either side of the girl, looming over her once again. Saying nothing, he continued to silently gaze at her, his eyes silently asking for permission, and the girl reached out to him. He slowly brought his face closer, and this time their kiss felt completely different. Perhaps because she was the one who made the first move, she felt the tenderness from him. Soon, Sung Eun-hyung gave a thank you speech and told everyone involved in the film's production to enjoy themselves at the party. Jung Eun-gyo covered her ears from the loud music as she didn't enjoy such events, and watched Jae-heon from a distance. As usual, the guy was the center of attention, wearing his familiar mask. The girl thought that if he acted with her the same way, it would be easier for her to push him away. She admitted to herself that no one had ever looked at her the way he did, or kissed her the way he did, and she liked it. It made her wonder whether she was acting like a child, feeling such satisfaction and pride from this fact. Suddenly, she saw a girl say something to the guy, and then they both headed off somewhere together. Eun-gyo smirked at the thought that she was jealous of him. Suddenly, she was distracted by Hyung, who cheerfully asked why she was standing alone there. She said she was about to leave, but the guy suddenly told her to stay at least for the congratulations to Lee Jae-heon. The girl was surprised when she saw his friends with a cake and candles. She didn't know it was his birthday today. Hyung noticed her confusion and said that he thought she knew, but in any case, the guy didn't like talking much about himself, so she might not have known. While the guy was distracted, the girl took the opportunity and quietly decided to slip away from the party. She navigated through the crowd, thinking that since he had left with that girl, maybe it was best for her to leave too. They could talk later. She was wondering whether she should wait for him to congratulate him after all. Suddenly, as she bumped into someone, she apologized and continued pushing her way through the crowd. The stranger froze, watching the girl who had just bumped into him as she disappeared into the crowd. After returning from a 3-year absence, Lee Do-yoon thought he saw his ex, but it seemed highly unlikely. 4 years ago, on Lee Do-hyun's birthday, Jung Eun-gyo was waiting for him at the cafe as usual. The rain was pouring heavily outside, and her boyfriend, who kept postponing their meetings, had promised that he would come after meeting with his friends. She waited for him until the cafe closed, feeling like the heroine of a tragic love story. From that day, she began to feel the cracks in their relationship, which grew wider with time. Over time, they started seeing each other less and less. On weekends, he was always busy with plans with friends, and there were always excuses. The girl increasingly heard from mutual acquaintances about where he was and who he was with, but she still pretended that everything was fine between them. She pretended not to understand that she had become a burden to him because she liked him so much, until it was too late. The girl didn't understand why she was remembering all of this now. Maybe it was because today was Lee Jae-heon's birthday, and she was waiting for him in the same way. Eun-gyo had been waiting for him by the car for over 30 minutes and was starting to think maybe she should just call a taxi. She thought to herself that he wasn't the kind of person who would forget his promise and leave without saying a word. She tiredly lowered her head and thought that waiting for someone without knowing when they would arrive wasn't very pleasant. Suddenly, she heard Jaehan's voice calling her, and in shock, she peeked out from behind the corner. The first thing that came to her mind was a birthday greeting. The guy stared at her in surprise. Hearing that she stayed just to wish him a happy birthday, the guy felt pleased and gave her a strange look. Eun-gyo asked how he was planning to get home since he had been drinking. But Jae-heon asked her how long she had been waiting for him and why she hadn't called, wondering if it was because she hadn't saved his number. The girl couldn't admit to him that she had thrown away the paper, so she said that the sheet had gotten wet and the numbers were unreadable. The guy stared at her, not believing a word she said. In the next moment, he slammed his fist onto the hood of the car and showed her his phone, which was ringing with a notification. He said that in that case, she should have done it this way, and he would have come right away. The girl blushed, thinking to herself, who would even think of doing something like that just to call the owner over? He smirked and said that next time, she shouldn't just stand there waiting for him, but do something like that instead. The guy looked at the girl and, with a sly smile, said that he could interpret her behavior in a certain way. Eun-gyo stared at him in confusion and asked how exactly. Opening the car door for her, he said that he could interpret it as a sign of her interest and affection. Unexpectedly, she realized that they were back in the back seat, and as if reading her mind, the guy said that he had called the driver, so he would take her home. The girl blushed and said that she could call a taxi, and that he was tired and didn't need to take her home since it was completely out of his way. Suddenly, Jae-heon grabbed her hand, kissed her wrist, and, not taking his eyes off her, said that he didn't want to part with her. He looked at her with a seductive gaze and said that he wanted to stay with her a little longer. The girl blushed, thinking that he had completely lost his mind. She asked where he had disappeared to from the club, and the guy wondered if she was jealous. He replied that he had been meeting with relatives, and when he returned, he couldn't find her. Leaning towards her, he said he had already thought that someone had seduced her and taken her away. The girl scoffed and replied that there wasn't a single man there who could seduce her. Eun-gyo told him not to lie to her, as she had seen him leave with another girl. The guy turned her face towards him and, smirking with satisfaction, said that there were so many people there, yet she couldn't take her eyes off him. Suddenly, they were interrupted by a knock on the window. The driver had arrived, and the girl, blushing, turned away from Jae-heon. The driver sat down, recited the address, and asked if it was correct. Eun-gyo heard the address of the cafe and, with indignation, said that he was cunning and wasn't going to his house in the first place. The guy smirked and said that his plan was to find her, no matter what. They headed home, still holding hands. Lee Do-yoon arrived at the workshop only to find it closed. Outside, he clearly saw his car, which meant that his stepbrother was definitely nearby. The man looked at the building with interest, thinking that the first floor seemed to be commercial, while the second floor appeared to be a residential area. Meanwhile, Eun-gyo offered Jae-heon a piece of cake, wishing him a happy birthday. While the ex-boyfriend stood outside, pondering whether it was a coincidence that his friend, ex-girlfriend, and stepbrother were all in the same social circle, unpleasant thoughts started to cross his mind. The young couple decided to continue what had been interrupted in the car earlier. Not having finished her dessert, the girl found herself in Jae-heon's embrace, her mind racing with thoughts of where this delicate balancing act would lead. She admitted to herself that she liked this guy, but could love actually develop between them? Right now, she just lost her mind at the mere glance of him. The girl got distracted by her phone, but in the next moment, the guy grabbed her hands and said that he no longer wanted to be distracted. He looked at her and said that ever since the cinema hall, he had been barely holding himself back. Then he leaned over her again and, before kissing her, said that he would do what he had dreamed of for a long time. After a while, the guy stood leaning against the doorframe, jokingly grumbling that he also wanted to take a shower, but the girl warned him not to enter. He smiled, watching her, feeling pleased with himself. Even though she didn't remember him, he made sure she would remember his face now. Eun-gyo closed the bathroom door and continued to think about what had just happened. Meanwhile, the guy was reflecting on how he had finally caught up to her. He thought that if she hadn't stayed in one place for all these 3 years, he would have had a much harder time. But this was just the beginning. The sound of a notification on his phone pulled him from his thoughts. It was an alert about damage to his car, and in the photo was his stepbrother standing nearby. Jae-heon stared at his phone, tension building as he wondered what the hell his stepbrother could possibly want now. A few hours earlier, Lee Do-hyun stood in the club and told his friend that he thought he saw his ex-girlfriend. His friend was surprised and asked, "Why would she be here?" The young man said that what bothered him more was why his ex-girlfriend and Lee Jae-heon were in the same place. He didn't like it at all. Lee Jae-heon turned off the circuit breakers and the house went dark. He called out to the girl, saying that it looked like the power had gone out and that he would go check what the problem was. He asked the girl to stay inside for now so she wouldn't slip and said he would be back soon. The young man clenched his jaw and strode toward his brother, determined to get rid of him as quickly as possible. Lee Do-hyun heard the sound of footsteps, turned around and saw his brother. He greeted him with a calm expression. The men went down to the workshop and Jae-heon asked why his brother had come here. Didn't he plan to go home after the club? The man looked around and said that the club was completely boring. His brother smirked and replied that he had warned him there wouldn't be anything interesting there. Do-hyun smirked and said that he thought his brother was hiding something interesting. Jae-heon caught the strange undertones in his voice but didn't show any reaction. Then he asked why he had come to his workshop. The man put on an innocent expression and replied that, after all, it was his younger brother's birthday. He stated that they had little time at the club, and he wanted to spend more time talking with him. Jae-heon smiled at him just as falsely and said that his brother knew he didn't like surprises or uninvited guests. They sat down across from each other, and the older man remarked that his younger brother had grown up, matured, and become quite popular among women. Jae-heon scoffed and replied that he had worked hard to become that way. They continued to smile falsely at each other, both trying to figure out what the other was hiding. Do-hyun said that he had stopped by his place and saw another car, asking if their father had gifted him a new one for his birthday. To his surprise, Jae-heon tossed him the keys and said that he could take it for himself. The man smirked as he looked at the keys and asked if their parents spoiled his brother too much, giving him such expensive gifts, considering he was still a student. Then he leaned in and asked why, if his brother had everything anyone could dream of, he was raiding his stuff. Jae-heon didn't show that he understood his brother's hint, and with his arms crossed, he innocently smiled and asked, "Isn't it the older brother who has everything he desires?" Then Do-hyun decided to ask directly if his younger brother wanted to tell him anything, at least about what was going on between him and Kim Hae-da. He wanted to catch him off guard, but that sly smile never left his face. The man suddenly said that, in any case, he had no reason to suspect his cool younger brother and thanked him for the car, as he had just returned and it would be perfect for him to have something to drive. As he was leaving, he added that the guys from the club were a perfect match for his age, and his brother should spend more time with people his own age. There was a hint of warning in his voice. Lee Jae-heon called after his brother that he had come without a gift but left with a new car, which wasn't very polite. He also asked him not to come to his workshop without an invitation in the future. He rolled up his sleeves as if he were about to work, revealing his muscular, strong arms, and with a tense smile, he said that he didn't want anyone who didn't understand art to be discussing it. Do-hyun silently waved at his brother and left. As he ascended to the second floor, the guy thought about whether his brother had noticed anything, and how he had acted and said some strange things. It was a relief that Eun-gyo had left the club first, and they hadn't had the chance to meet. He entered the girl's apartment, where it was still dark. But suddenly the light turned on, and he smiled upon seeing Eun-gyo in a towel, wet from the shower. The girl said that he had been gone for so long, and she started to worry. He swallowed as he watched her hold the knot and the water droplets trickling down her body. He lifted her in his arms, and despite her futile attempts to protest, laughing, he said that he wanted to take a shower together. The girl, panicked and embarrassed, watched as he took off his t-shirt and tried to say that she could still leave. But the guy flashed an enchanting smile and replied that there were several reasons why he wanted her to stay. The next morning, Jae-heon stood in the middle of the girl's room, staring at the rabbit he had given her. Finally, he heard rustling behind him. Eun-gyo sleepily asked what time it was, and when she heard that it was almost noon, she screamed in horror. She tiredly rubbed her eyes, thinking about how she had planned to send him off earlier so that Haida wouldn't catch them. He leaned down to her and said that she had promised to go to the hospital with him, and after that they could take a walk. At the entrance stood an enraged Kim Haida, who understood everything without words, judging by the red face of the girl and the fact that Jae-heon was wearing the same clothes as yesterday. He told the girl to cancel the blind date herself and asked the guy to follow him for a word or two. Eun-gyo felt embarrassed and knew that her friend wouldn't believe any excuses. She was also tired of finding herself in situations like this. After a while, the couple sat in the car, and the girl asked what the guys had talked about. Jae-heon smiled and replied that it was just the usual moral lecture from a caring friend. The girl looked at her friend through the window and thought that he cared for her like a jealous father. Perhaps after all these years, it had become second nature to him. The doctor examined Jae-heon's hand and said that the stitches had been removed, but he should keep the bandage on for a couple more days. Walking out of the office, he met the concerned gaze of the girl. She immediately stood up to meet him and asked what the doctor had said. He smiled at how sweet she was and how genuinely concerned she was for him. He appreciated her care. He felt a rush of warmth as she gently took his hand and started to examine it. The simple, caring gesture made him recall last night and the way she had looked in the shower, when he was standing the same way, looking down at her. He smiled at his thoughts and suggested they go have lunch together, but Eun-gyo replied that she would pay since she works and he's a student. The guy tensed up because she considered him a child, but he didn't show it, saying that even though he was a student, he successfully and expensively sold his creations, so she didn't need to worry. The girl looked at him and thought that, judging by the paperweight he had given her, he was indeed very skilled. As they were leaving the hospital, the guy smiled and suggested they have some meat, saying that the girl seemed very skinny to him. She shrugged and replied that it was just her genetics. In the next moment, the guy leaned in and, smiling, said that he really liked her figure. He was about to list the specific parts of her body, but the girl interrupted him. With a burning face from indignation, the girl stomped ahead, thinking to herself how shameless he was to say such things in public. The guy smiled fondly at her and said that he knew a place that served delicious meat. Kim Haida and Seon-tae were working as usual when they heard the sound of the bell, signaling the arrival of a new customer. Seeing that it was Do-hyun who had arrived, the young man froze in horror, unable to even greet him. Meanwhile, Do-hyun greeted him warmly and casually. He looked at his friend and said that they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Tensing up, Haida gritted his teeth and thought to himself, "What the hell is he doing here?" Eun-gyo stood by the bookshelf and noticed her book, which, after several years since its release, had found its way to the lower shelves. She wasn't surprised that her book had stopped being a bestseller. She remembered how excited Haida had been back then and how supportive he had been. She picked up the book, thinking that back then her writing style had seemed bold, but now it felt outdated. Suddenly, Jae-heon appeared and asked if she had chosen anything. He noticed that she was holding a book she had written and, taking it, said he would buy it for himself. The girl protested, saying that she would give him her own copy instead, but he placed the book in his stack and said that he wanted to read it and give an unbiased opinion. The guy smiled at her again and said that she shouldn't worry. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to bear it. With those words, he headed to the cashier and paid for his purchases. Meanwhile, Kim Haida said he would take the coffee to their visitor, and Seon-tae asked if he knew that guy personally. The young man looked at his former friend and told his coworker that he knew him very well. Frowning, he thought to himself that this bastard had broken Eun-gyo's heart. Approaching the table, he didn't bother with formalities and immediately asked what business he had here and how long he was back for. Do-hyun replied that he was hurt by such a cold welcome. The young men locked eyes, each lost in his own thoughts. Haida sat down across from the guy, who remarked that he had a great cafe and then immediately asked if Eun-gyo lived here or perhaps worked with him. The guy tensed up at the question and, clenching his jaw, replied that it was none of his business. However, Do-hyun just smirked and said that he simply wanted to know how she was doing since the two of them had always been close. Then he asked why his younger brother suddenly rented a workshop in the same building. The guy replied that it would be better for him to talk to his brother about it since he had the space, and Jae-heon was looking for a workshop. Nothing more. Do-hyun smirked and said that Jae-heon had apparently planned it all. Suddenly, Haida leaned back and, with a smirk, asked how the man's child was doing. He pretended to think for a moment and asked, "He should be about 2 years old by now, right?" Do-hyun forced a fake smile and said that it turned out the child wasn't his. He remarked that no one would have thought some bastard would set all of this up. He looked at his former friend and said that it was very strange, but he couldn't remember spending the night with that woman, and Haida was the only witness. The guy gritted his teeth in anger and said that Do-hyun should keep his tongue behind his teeth because the girl still doesn't know why he left her, and now she no longer needs his explanations. He said that if the guy hurts her again, he would personally destroy him. Do-hyun continued drinking his coffee calmly and said that he was pleasantly surprised that his friend had learned to make threats. Then Do-hyun added that he knew how vulnerable Eun-gyo was, so he would proceed carefully. After all, he had disappeared for 3 years, but he was confident he could make things right. Kim Haida boiled with rage and started yelling at him, shouting that something was seriously wrong with his head. Do-hyun, almost like a psychopath, smiled and said that if they thought about it, he and the girl never really broke up. The guy couldn't take it anymore and slammed his fist on the table, shouting that it was all nonsense. The other patrons started turning to look at the noise. Do-hyun stood up from the table, complimenting the coffee, and told his friend to keep an eye on Eun-gyo, as he would be back for her soon. He then said his goodbyes and left. At the end, Kim Haida said with resignation that after his departure, the girl was so broken that he could barely bring her back to life. She almost died, and now his return could have a negative impact on her. He threatened his friend that if anything happened to her, he would deal with him personally, but Do-hyun just waved goodbye, saying nothing in response. He knew that this bastard hadn't changed at all. He had always been selfish, hiding his dark soul beneath an attractive exterior. He wasn't any better himself, which is why he could see right through the guy. And Lee Jae-heon was just like them. And Eun-gyo was unlucky to become the center of their attention. They all desired to be close to her. If initially the winner was Lee Do-hyun, last 3 years he has been the winner, now Lee Jae-heon had pulled ahead. At that moment, Lee Jae-heon and Jung Eun-gyo were enjoying their walk and each other's company. The guy was genuinely there for the girl. Kim Haida said to Seon-tae that he was going out for a smoke, and the guy nervously replied that he could handle things on his own. The guy stepped outside and lit a cigarette with trembling hands, trying to calm himself down. He had always protected Eun-gyo and never wanted to burden her with his feelings, which is why he never asked for anything more than friendship. A few days later, Eun-gyo arrived at the university for a meeting with the professor. As she looked around, she realized that not much had changed since her graduation. She reflected on how her youth had unfolded here. Even the air smelled the same. The thought crossed her mind that Lee Jae-heon should also be in class at this time. Since that night, they had seen each other every day. He would confidently come over during the day under the pretext of taking a shower. And every time they met, it ended with her completely exhausted yet utterly satisfied. The girl blushed, recalling the past few days, and thought that it was difficult to define what was happening between them. She wouldn't exactly call it a romantic relationship. She suddenly remembered what he had told her and thought that they were more like friends with benefits. Eun-gyo lightly knocked on the door, feeling a sadness settle over her. She thought that their relationship, no matter what it was, had no future. It was like a summer rain. Pleasant and light, but inevitably fleeting. The door opened, and the elderly professor greeted his former top student with a beaming smile. The man handed the girl a cup of tea, saying that she hadn't changed at all. She gratefully accepted it. The professor said that he had read her book and found it to be a great work. The girl was pleasantly surprised, as no one had ever openly praised her like that before. The man said that many students had requested for her to give lectures, as she was once a student like them and had managed to write a bestseller. Eun-gyo blushed even more from such praise. She was grateful to him for the opportunity to gain additional experience. Moreover, it seemed that he had started to treat her more gently because she had achieved success in this field. The girl asked how his family was doing, and the professor replied that everything was fine, mentioning that his son had served in the army and had grown up. Eun-gyo smiled and said that she remembered the little boy. Then they reminisced a bit more and discussed what should be prepared for the start of the lectures. As they said their goodbyes, the man thanked her for coming and invited her to have dinner together sometime. Eun-gyo politely said goodbye him off and left. Around the corner of the hallway, Eun-gyo suddenly bumped into Lee Jae-heon, who asked why she had come to the university. They walked together, and the girl replied that she would start teaching next semester and had come to meet with the professor. Jae-heon reached out to her, wanting to take her hand, but the girl quickly pulled her hand away, surprising him greatly. He was offended by this, so he asked more sharply than he meant, "How does she have time to teach if she's working at a coffee shop and writing a book?" Eun-gyo didn't understand why he had changed so abruptly, as if he wanted to argue, and calmly replied that she would do her best to manage everything. The guy hummed uncertainly and walked ahead, leaving her a little behind. Then suddenly the girl froze, feeling a surge of confusion and jealousy. A cute girl ran up to Jae-heon, grabbed his hand, and smiled, saying that he was so hard to find. Eun-gyo watched as the girl wrapped her arm around Jae-heon's, continuing to chatter about something. She began to wonder what kind of relationship they had. In the next moment, several students gathered around Jae-heon, eagerly asking him questions about something. He was always surrounded by attention. The girl watched this scene and suddenly realized that she didn't belong there at all. She decided that it was best for her to leave, so as she walked past the group, she simply told him that it was time for her to go. The guy reached out to her, trying to stop her, and suggested they go together, but she dodged him again and simply said that he was in a hurry to get to the cafe. Suddenly, the girls around him said that they recognized her and asked if she had come there with a delivery. Eun-gyo smiled and simply replied that she had her own business there, adding that she would always be happy to see them at the cafe. As she walked away, she thought to herself that the guy must feel more comfortable among his peers. Even back then, in the cafe, she thought that he would be better off with a young and cheerful girl, not someone as tough and grounded as herself. But deep down, she wanted Lee Jae-heon to go crazy for her. She was constantly plagued by heavy and contradictory thoughts. She shook herself as more and more often she was overwhelmed by strong and unfamiliar feelings that scared her. Suddenly, she realized that in her deep thoughts, she had not walked toward the gates, but had instead ended up at the central square, where preparations for the festival were in full swing. A girl approached her, tearfully begging for help. Their detective club was preparing puzzles and tests for the upcoming festival, and they needed someone from outside to test them. Since Eun-gyo hesitated, the girl immediately pulled her to their table and said that all she had to do was solve a riddle and go through the maze without letting go of the hand. She handed her a sheet with puzzles and asked her to solve them and determine the level of difficulty. To the students' surprise, the girl solved all the puzzles quite quickly. Now she had to navigate the maze without letting go of the hand. The girl took the marker in her hand and started studying the lines on the paper, examining the drawing. She didn't notice how a male figure appeared behind her. Lee Jae-heon leaned over the girl and extended his hand, remarking that he didn't think this was a difficult task. He quickly solved the maze. The proximity of his presence made the girl blush, and the students protested, saying it was unfair because Jae-heon had spoiled the integrity of their experiment. The guy turned to the girl and said it was time for them to go, but the student said she deserved a prize for her help. She noticed a stand with toys, where there was a huge teddy bear. The guy asked if she wanted one like that. Eun-gyo replied that it wasn't the case at all. She enjoyed watching how the guy interacted with his classmates and noted that he could be quite charming with those around him. Jae-heon approached one of the students and offered advice on how to improve and complicate the tasks to make them more interesting. While the girl was lost in thought, a sheet with a higher difficulty level was placed in front of her, and they told her that if she completed it, she would be given a gift immediately. Lee Jae-heon immediately appeared behind her and told her to focus, encouraging her to try to solve the maze without touching the walls or retracing her steps. He gently supported her, holding her hand in his. The girl couldn't concentrate due to his presence. She felt his hands on her body and his breath on her cheek, and uninvited thoughts filled her mind. The guy noticed that Eun-gyo's breathing had become uneven and that her cheeks and neck had turned red. He couldn't hold back a sigh, and his breath made the girl flinch. Their hands slipped and they failed the test. In the next moment, he whispered in her ear that he was a real psycho. The girl looked at him in confusion. He continued to hold her, saying that his heart was beating so fast and that he really wanted to kiss her right now, in front of everyone. He pulled her along, and she, trying to keep up with him, asked why he was in such a hurry and where he was taking her. Suddenly, the girl broke free from his grip and stopped. He turned around in surprise and stared at her. Every time she seemed to be within his reach, she slipped away at the last moment. But no matter how many times she rejected him, he wasn't planning on giving up. He looked at the flustered girl and, smiling, asked what she was thinking about that made her blush so deeply. If she could, she would have run away. But instead, she blushed even more and couldn't answer him. The guy laughed so sincerely that Eun-gyo suddenly felt like she had seen such a smile before. She remembered a boy she had known a few years ago, but then she shook herself out of it. It couldn't be him after all. That boy had a different last name. And besides, he was smaller than his peers. Lee Jae-heon approached her and said he would walk her to the exit. He reached out his hand to her, but she once again pulled away. Unable to hold back, he asked why she was avoiding his touch, both back at the university and now. Eun-gyo replied that he should avoid doing anything like that in public. She asked what his friends would think if they saw them together. The guy turned around and asked what could possibly be so strange about them that people might think. He asked if she still saw him as just a kid. The girl sighed and replied that it was true because he was younger than her. Then he suddenly leaned toward her and quietly said that she really enjoyed the company of such a young guy like him that night. He said she was full of enthusiasm, wondering if she had already forgotten. Eun-gyo got angry and told him to watch what he said. She pulled away and said that right now he was acting like a child. Unable to hold back, he asked if he should start dating girls his own age instead of her. The girl froze, feeling her heart skip a beat at those words. The guy said that they had never agreed on anything. He asked her if he were to start dating girls his age. Would she continue her relationship with him without any questions? He was curious if this would ease her conscience, since she was constantly comparing him to his peers. She looked at him fiercely and replied that yes. In that way, she would silence her conscience. At work, the girl was lost in thought due to her recent argument with Lee Jae-heon. She made the coffee and irritably tried to cover it with the lid. What she had said to the guy wouldn't leave her mind. It wasn't about her conscience at all. It was stubbornness and pathetic pride, refusing to lose to a guy she still considered so young. After hearing her response, he didn't even change his expression, and throughout the whole walk to the cafe, he acted just like usual. So who was really acting like the child in the end? In her thoughts, the girl didn't notice Kim Hae-da walking behind her with a hot tray of freshly baked croissants and accidentally bumped into him with her hand. The guy immediately rushed to assist her. He helped her place her burned hand under a stream of cold water. She sadly thought that Hae-da's touches didn't bring her the thrill and excitement that she felt when Lee Jae-heon touched her. She watched as her friend headed toward the first aid kit and thought that even if she hugged him, she would feel nothing but the familiar comfort. Suddenly, she asked if Kim Hae-da was seeing anyone. He grumbled and asked since when she was concerned about his personal life. To his surprise, the girl suggested that they get married if neither of them finds a partner by the time they turn 50. She gave a strained smile and said that at least they would take care of each other in old age. The guy applied the ointment and bandage to the wound, then told her she was talking nonsense and that he wanted to marry a girl he would love and kiss in the morning, afternoon, and evening. She puckered her lips and asked if she wasn't a girl, to which the guy smiled and replied that she was first and foremost his friend, and he couldn't even imagine kissing her. Eun-gyo laughed and said that she felt the same way about him and asked him to always remain her friend. The guy gave a sad smile and wondered whether he was really that good at lying, or if the girl truly didn't notice anything at all. Finally, he told her to see a doctor for the burn if it got worse. A few days later, their cafe participated in the festival, where Kim Hae-da was recognized by the organizers and many visitors. The girl was arranging the cups with drinks when a male voice suddenly called her name. A tall young man greeted her and said that he recognized her. He introduced himself as Park Sung-ju and mentioned that they were supposed to go on a date, but she had canceled at the last moment. Eun-gyo then realized that this was one of the guys Kim Hae-da had shown her before. The man handed her his business card and said that he ran an event agency, and this festival was one of their projects. He suggested her to take a walk and have a look around. He said that he had really wanted to meet her back then. Eun-gyo felt awkward and replied that, unfortunately, she had been too busy with work lately. Park Sung-ju smiled and said that he was glad they managed to meet like this, as if fate itself had brought them together. The girl looked at him and thought that he was very open and pleasant, but unfortunately, he resembled Lee Do-hyun too much, so it was probably for the best that she hadn't gone on the date with him back then. She decided to offer him coffee when suddenly she saw Lee Jae-heon step out of the neighboring booth. The same girl who had come to him at the cafe and approached him at the university was once again by his side. The smile on his face only intensified the feeling of jealousy that pierced through Eun-gyo. She couldn't help but recall his words about how, since she was insisting, he would end up dating someone his own age. Her thoughts were interrupted by Park Sung-ju, who asked if she would treat him to coffee. Eun-gyo smiled and handed him a cup. The man decided to keep chatting with her and began asking about the festival, mentioning that he had read her book. Eun-gyo tried to maintain a polite conversation with him. Lee Jae-heon noticed the man standing next to Eun-gyo, flirting with her and even inviting her to go somewhere together. Everything inside him immediately tensed up. The man, meanwhile, was suggesting they go together to a classical music or jazz concert, saying he would send her the tickets. Eun-gyo, despite his politeness, was finding it hard to figure out how to refuse him. Suddenly, she noticed the guy heading in their direction, casually taking off his gloves. She felt uncomfortable, realizing he might have overheard the man flirting with her. As he reached her table, Park Sung-ju cheerfully promised to visit her at the cafe. To her surprise and disappointment, he simply walked past, as if they had never met at all. She pressed her lips together, feeling a pang of sadness, realizing that she had been the one to ask him not to show any affection in public. A lump formed in her throat as she wondered what would happen if she turned around and called out his name. But suddenly, she felt his grip on her wrist. He turned her to face him, his gaze locking onto the bandage on her hand. With a tense expression, he asked, "What was this? When did she get hurt?" She stared at him in shock, her cheeks instantly flushing with heat. The man asked if she knew this student, and she replied that he was their tenant and had turned the basement under the cafe into a workshop. Jae-heon smirked and told Park Sung-ju that the staff had been looking for him, mentioning that there were some issues with the sound. The man glanced at his phone in confusion and said he would go check. As he left, he suggested the girl to take a walk after the festival and said goodbye. Lee Jae-heon leaned in close to her face and snarled that she kept telling him to date girls his age, yet here she was, flirting with some guy. Then he straightened up and spat out with sarcasm that he had completely forgotten he wasn't allowed to approach her in public. Turning on his heel, he prepared to leave. She watched his back as he walked away, a heavy sense of guilt settling over her, even though she had done nothing wrong. Deep down, she finally admitted to herself that the only man who truly interested her was Lee Jae-heon. Obeying her emotions, she suddenly rushed after him, her thoughts racing. He was just as bad, always surrounded by different girls. He was walking briskly, consumed by jealousy and anger, when he suddenly felt a hesitant touch and heard Eun-gyo's timid voice. He stopped in shock and turned around. Burning with embarrassment, the girl was holding onto his t-shirt and asked if he was finishing his business soon. Eun-gyo's heart was pounding in her chest as she looked up at the guy with wide eyes and said that she wanted to go home with him. The girl stood there, thinking she had probably shocked him with her request. She had already assumed he would laugh at her, but suddenly car keys appeared in front of her face. Lee Jae-heon asked if she remembered where he had parked his car last time. She had already assumed he would laugh at her, but suddenly car keys appeared in front of her face. Lee Jae-heon asked if she remembered where he had parked his car last time. Then he turned around and said he'd be back soon. The girl watched him walk away, tightly gripping the keys in her hand. A silly smile spread across her face, and she thought that she felt completely happy, as if she had been balancing on a tightrope for a long time and had finally jumped off. She didn't know if this choice would bring her pain in the future, but for now, she felt a sense of relief. After a while, they were driving in the car, and Jung Eun-gyo asked where they were going, as this road definitely didn't lead to her house. The guy replied that they were heading to his place because there were too many variables at her home. When she asked what he meant, he replied that the cafe had a lot of surveillance cameras and that Kim Hae-da could track them. Then he suddenly said that he hadn't expected the guy she had canceled the blind date with to be Park Sung-ju. The girl admitted that lately she had too much going on for something like this, and that she hadn't expected to run into the guy like that either. She looked out the window with interest and said that he lived quite far from the campus. Lee Jae-heon calmly replied that they were almost there, and that he was barely holding himself back from tossing her into the back seat of the car. Soon, they parked the car and got out. The girl stood, waiting for his next move. To her surprise, he politely extended his hand to her, as if waiting. She remembered how yesterday he looked at her as if asking for permission to kiss her. But today, a confident, easy smile played on his face. The quiet, synchronized breathing of the young men could be heard in the room. Jaehyun's hands boldly explored the girl's body. He pulled away from her, smirking, and asked if she had changed her mind now that they were at his place. She blushed and replied that she hadn't changed her mind, but she was embarrassed by his impatience, especially since they were standing right in front of the entrance door. The guy smirked, and in the next moment, he easily lifted her in his arms and carried her to the bedroom. Being in his arms, she was embarrassed. She felt a sense of excitement. He sat her on the bed, took off his t-shirt, and the girl turned away, saying that he had a beautiful view from the window. Jaehyun smirked and ran his finger along her lower lip, saying that she was lucky to be able to distract herself with such things, because he felt like he might die from not being able to take his eyes off her. Turning her to face him, he leaned in and whispered in her ear that he was going crazy because of her. And though Eun-gyo didn't say it aloud, she thought to herself that being next to him felt like she was endlessly falling into an abyss, only for him to pull her up again and again until she finally reached the bottom. After a while, the guy smirked, running his hand through his hair, satisfied that he had driven her crazy just as she had done to him. The girl's phone was buzzing with another incoming call from Kim Hae-da, but she rejected it, just like all the others. Lee Jae-heon asked if she wanted him to answer the call and tell Kim Hae-da that she was busy, or if she was worried her friend might find out they were together. Jung Eun-gyo, breathing heavily, replied that he better not do that. Taking advantage of the moment, the girl tried to escape from him, but the guy caught her by the waist and, smirking, said that she was acting so cute. It only amused him more. He turned her to face him and leaned over her, studying her intently. Her lips were swollen from the kisses and her cheeks were flushed. She looked so cute and beautiful. He kissed her gently and Eun-gyo embraced him, pulling him closer as she melted into the moment. The next day, the guy drove her home and asked if she wanted to go to the festival with him, but the girl replied that she wanted to rest for a bit. She thought about how he hadn't let her sleep the whole night, and her body ached, craving rest. The guy smiled and replied that he could stay with her at home, give her a massage, and take care of her. But upon hearing this, the girl hurried to the door, thanked him for the previous day, and said that she wanted to be alone. As she left, she noticed how disappointed he was by her refusal, especially since just yesterday his face had held such a genuine smile. The night before, they had a late-night snack. Settling on the couch, she threw her legs over him and they ate pizza, smiling and sharing stories about themselves. That's when she learned that Lee Jae-heon was into tennis and soccer and sometimes played golf with his parents. All kinds of physical sports came easily to him. He lived quite far from the university, so he often stayed overnight at his studio. Eun-gyo shared that she loved eating desserts, spent her weekends visiting bookstores, and read books late into the night. They chatted for so long that at one point he reached out, gently stroking her face, and said that she looked tired, as if she was about to fall asleep any moment. In the next moment, the girl truly felt her eyes close and she drifted off to sleep. Now, she went up to her apartment and looked out the window, thinking about how, unlike Lee Jae-heon, who was always emotionally open and never shy about showing his feelings, she constantly evaluated her emotions and carefully watched everything she did. She saw the smiling guy standing below her window, apparently wanting to make sure she was really home. The girl waved to him and thought that he was like a sudden rain that catches you off guard when you've stepped outside without an umbrella. Then she decided it was time to return to reality and get in touch with Kim Hae-da, who was probably going crazy over the fact that she hadn't answered any of his calls. Picking up her phone, the girl froze when she saw Lee Do-yeon's number among the missed calls. She had deleted his number a long time ago, but she still knew it by heart. She was certain that he couldn't have called her by mistake. 3 years ago, she had been just a love-struck fool who neglected herself and everyone around her. She remembered how she had stared at her phone screen, sinking into her depression, unable to believe that he could have done that to her. She was shattered and on the verge of letting go of everything that had ever mattered to her. And the only one who appeared just in time and pulled her out of that state was Kim Hae-da, offering to start a business together. She didn't really believe that it would help, but his smile and warm gaze gave her strength. The only thing she wanted was to avoid anything that even remotely reminded her of her ex. Kim Hae-da constantly insisted that she should throw away Lee Do-yeon's things herself and close that chapter of her life. Meanwhile, Lee Jae-heon appeared and easily offered to help her deal with this painful moment. He simply took care of it himself. The girl tiredly fell onto the bed and thought that she had only managed to get rid of those things because of him. Although it weighed heavily on her, she couldn't find the strength to clear the room on her own. She sent a message to Kim Hae-da, letting him know that she was home. The phone rang a second later, and when she answered, she heard her friend's worried voice scolding her for disappearing from home without telling anyone and not even staying there the night. The girl replied that she was already 30 years old and was grown up enough not to have to answer to him. Her friend told her to stay home since he would be coming over soon. She asked him to bring some pain relief patches on the way. Lee Jae-heon stood under the girl's window, contemplating what had happened. Perhaps he should have been more persistent. Returning to the car, he wondered if she had enjoyed everything. She had looked very happy yesterday, but why did she tell him today to go meet his friends? He sadly thought to himself that she still saw him as a child. Every time he was with his peers, he treated them like children, swayed by their emotions, and considered them background noise. While interacting with them, he thought of himself as being above all of that. But every time he saw Eun-gyo, it was the opposite. Suddenly, energy surged within him, and he was overwhelmed by emotions. With her, he felt like a child trying to act like an adult. He smirked, unsure of what to do, but he was certain he hadn't chased after her for so long just to give up like this. After a while, Kim Hae-da placed a small bag of treats on the girl's table, telling her to eat them later. The girl was surprised and grateful, as these were sweets from a shop that was not easily accessible, and to buy anything, you had to order in advance. The guy replied that the owner was an acquaintance of his. Handing her a packet of patches, he asked where she planned to apply them. Eun-gyo replied that she would apply them to her lower back and hips. But when she leaned over the table, the guy noticed marks on her neck. He didn't comment on it, simply asking her to take better care of her body. The girl, feeling embarrassed, thanked him. The guy lay down on the couch, saying he would rest for a bit, and the girl didn't object. He asked how she planned to spend her vacation, but she replied that she would just stay home, relax, and focus on her manuscript. He then mentioned that there were plenty of great places she could visit to change the scenery and continue writing in peace. But the girl replied that she was still saving up for her own house. The guy then suggested that she rewrite one in her name. She sighed and told him not to talk nonsense. Kim Hae-da then asked how her meeting with Park Sung-ju had gone. Eun-gyo asked if he had planned everything on purpose, and her friend replied that he had, hoping that after the face-to-face meeting, she would change her mind and go on a date with that guy. The girl honestly replied that he had a pleasant appearance and manners, but for her, it was a bit too much. The guy asked what she meant, saying that the man was very eager to meet her. He said that the man really liked her and had been asking for a long time to be introduced. Hearing this, she was surprised and asked why he hadn't told her earlier. The guy sighed and replied that she always ran away as soon as she found out that some guy liked her. He knew that Park Sung-ju could be overly persistent if he liked a girl. He said that he had already turned him down for her once, but now it seemed like she was ready to go on dates, and he suggested that she give him a chance. Kim Hae-da looked at the girl seriously and said that it was time for her to pull herself together. And in that moment, the girl realized that her friend had already figured everything out. He had clearly guessed why she had been acting like a fool lately and who she had spent the previous night with. She was used to trusting her friend's opinions since he was often right, but the only person she wanted to be with right now was Lee Jae-heon. Suddenly, she decided to change the subject and admitted that Lee Do-yoon had called her. Hearing this, the guy cursed and anxiously asked if she had answered him. The girl said everything was fine, that it was just a missed call, and she wasn't planning to answer or call him back anyway. Kim Hae-da was angry and decided he would talk to him, but the girl suddenly said that it was exactly because Park Sung-ju resembled her ex so much that she didn't want to see him. This revelation surprised the guy. The girl smiled and said that she wanted to avoid anything that might remind her of him, and the guy apologized to her. Jae-hyun's friend was glad that the guy had finally agreed to come to the festival, but he grumbled about how long it took to convince him. He told him not to dare run away in the middle of the event like he did yesterday. Their professor gathered all the guys in good physical shape today to help the festival organizers. As they approached, the guys saw their professor talking to CEO Park. The man was thanking him for his help. He felt awkward asking first-year students for help, so he promised to arrange a great after-party as a token of gratitude. The students were whispering that the CEO was simply saving money by using the students' free labor to set up the stages and planned to squeeze more money out of him for the after-party. Jae-hyun, however, couldn't take his tense gaze off the already familiar man. He was about to leave when he heard Park Sung-ju's voice. The man called out to him, saying that he remembered him. He smiled at him and said that the professor spoke very highly of him, mentioning that Lee Jae-heon was the rising star of the sculpture department. They walked over to the snack machines, and the man continued, saying that he barely recognized him after yesterday's meeting. He had thought the guy was just a temporary worker. Jae-hyun was about to ask what the hell the man actually wanted from him when Park Sung-ju suddenly asked if he was close to Jung Eun-gyo. He replied that it might be the case. The man handed him a drink and asked if he knew why the girl suddenly disappeared yesterday. Jae-hyun deliberately smiled carelessly and asked if Sung-ju was the one who had been calling and texting her nonstop yesterday. Hearing this, the man froze and asked if that meant she had been with him yesterday. But the guy just kept smiling and replied that it was his personal life, and he wasn't going to answer such questions. He then added that if he was interested in something like that, he should ask Eun-gyo directly. The man wouldn't let up and said that they must be very close. But the guy had already walked a little further and simply said that he shouldn't worry about the exploitation of their labor. He could consider it a voluntary donation of their skills. With these words, he continued on his way, not wanting to continue the conversation. Park Sung-ju watched him walk away, feeling that the guy was hiding a lot. Even though he didn't answer directly, it was clear that something was going on between him and Jung Eun-gyo. Jae-heon walked up to the trash can and deliberately threw the drink can away. He understood that the man wanted, in his own way, to mark his territory, and he decided to let him continue living in his illusions. Meanwhile, Jung Eun-gyo was looking at the bandage on her arm and thought that maybe it was time to change the dressing. She remembered how 2 days ago she had been at Jae-hyun's place and how gently he asked her to treat her wound. He had a huge first aid kit because he often got injured while working with sculptures. Fortunately, he also had burn patches. He carefully took the girl's hand in his. His movements were methodical and slow. He carefully removed the old bandage and said that he didn't want her to ever get hurt. Then, suddenly, he smiled and said that although he had dreamed of seeing her in his clothes, they actually suited her even more than he had expected. The girl grumbled and said that she wasn't that petite at all. She sighed heavily and said that she was the same size as any other girl he had been with. She thought about how her whole body ached after their escapades. The guy's expression suddenly changed, and he stood up, clearly upset about something. Then he turned around and said that he hadn't been with anyone. There was a knock on the door, and he pulled on his t-shirt, smiling as he said, "It must be the pizza delivery." Eun-gyo thought to herself that it was complete nonsense that he hadn't been with anyone. After all, he must have been with someone at some point. Her thoughts were interrupted by a satisfied Kim Hae-da, who, stretching, was happy that the workday was finally over. Suddenly, he handed her a piece of paper and a pen, telling her to write a vacation announcement. She wasn't sure if it was a good idea to close the cafe for 2 weeks, but the guy said that since the festival was over and the university break had started, they could definitely use a little time to rest. While they were discussing how to write the announcement, the doorbell rang, signaling that someone had arrived at the cafe. Kim Hae-da shot an irritated glance at the door and scowled upon seeing the smiling Park Sung-ju, thinking to himself, "What the hell is this idiot doing here?" Without waiting to be invited, he stepped inside and greeted the girl. Kim Hae-da shot him a sharp look and asked, "Didn't you see the closed sign on the door? What are you doing here?" Park Sung-ju kept smiling as if nothing was wrong and said that since the festival was over, he thought he'd drop by and invite them to dinner. He kept his probing gaze fixed on the girl and said that since they were done, they could have dinner together. Kim Hae-da didn't like it. He had promised his friend not to interfere in her personal life, but he also knew just how pushy Sung-ju could be. To his surprise, the man handed the girl an envelope and said he had managed to get tickets to the concert they had talked about earlier. He added that she could invite someone who shared her taste. The girl gave him a strained smile, realizing that refusing would be impolite, and offered to thank him by paying for dinner instead. But the man gave her a strange look and said that he would pay for dinner himself, knowing that she wouldn't agree to go on a date with him, but he really wanted to spend some time with her. Eun-gyo didn't know how to respond, but Kim Hae-da came to her rescue and started escorting his friend out, saying that he was so persistent that they would have dinner with him. But that was all. When the man arrived for dinner, Kim Hae-da told the girl that they would have dinner together and not to worry. Afterward, he would talk to him so that he would leave her alone. She felt awkward accepting such expensive tickets from Park Sung-ju, but the man told her to take them as compensation for his persistent behavior. Soon they arrived at the venue, where it turned out the man had already reserved a table in advance, as he was hosting an after-party for the festival staff. At the entrance, the restaurant owner greeted Park Sung-ju, thanking him for filling the place today. Eun-gyo looked around and realized that indeed there were no available seats, and the place was packed with people. She thought to herself that the waiters were probably struggling to keep up when suddenly her gaze froze on one of the tables. She saw Lee Jae-heon sitting among his friends, smiling cheerfully. She couldn't understand how he ended up here, as the restaurant was supposed to be reserved for the staff of the company organizing the festival. Soon, they were escorted to their table, and Park Sung-ju asked what they would like to drink. Their table was not far from the one where Lee Jae-heon was sitting with his friends, so the girl could keep an eye on him. Park Sung-ju noticed the girl's intense gaze and could tell exactly who she was looking at, but he simply mentioned that students who helped during the festival were also present there today. Then, he waved at them, and the young people, noticing him, thanked him for such a delicious dinner. At that moment, Lee Jae-heon shot an annoyed glance. He wasn't thrilled about having to come here. But then he was taken aback when he saw Jung Eun-gyo sitting at the same table as the CEO. Kim Hae-da asked since when his friend had taken up charity, treating students. Meanwhile, the girl wondered why Jae-hyun looked so frowning when he saw her. Park Sung-ju smiled and started talking about a very handsome guy among the students, someone their manager had taken an interest in. Indeed, there was a pretty girl sitting next to Jae-hyun, who was clearly trying to catch his attention with every gesture. Meanwhile, the man continued speaking, saying that a guy with such looks, if he didn't get the right support, would eventually end up as a host in a club. Or perhaps he would become an influencer dependent on sponsors. That's why he decided to help him a bit, so his looks wouldn't go to waste. Eun-gyo listened to the man with disgust. He knew they were familiar with each other and deliberately said such nasty things about Jae-hyun. She was convinced that he was a repulsive person, someone she no longer wanted to associate with, and she hoped that after this dinner, she would never have to see him again. Suddenly, one of the waiters called Park Sung-ju to address an issue, and the man excused himself, standing up from the table. Kim Hae-da and Eun-gyo concluded that he was an unpleasant person, and she wanted to leave the establishment as soon as possible. Suddenly, she heard the students urging Lee Jae-hyun not to avoid the kiss, as he had already drunk 4 shots. It seemed they were playing a kissing game. But the guy raised his glass again and replied that he wouldn't kiss anyone because he didn't want to. The voice of her friend interrupted her thoughts as he irritably mentioned that Seon-tae had sent a message saying he was planning to quit. This upset her, as he had been a good employee. She stood up from the table and said that she would go to the pharmacy for a short while and would be back soon. Stepping outside, she finally took a deep breath of fresh air. She didn't like crowded places. Suddenly, she felt someone touch her shoulder and jumped in fear. It turned out to be Lee Jae-hyun, who had caught up with her and wrapped his arm around her, walking alongside her. His gaze was fierce, and without giving her a chance to say a word, he asked what she was doing with director Park Sung-ju. He led her around the corner and gently pressed her back against the wall. The guy kept holding her by the shoulders and asked anxiously if she had really come to have dinner with a man who was clearly losing his mind over her. She couldn't understand what had made him so angry, and replied that they had come with Kim Hae-da because the director offered to treat them to dinner. Nothing more. He was looking at her with the same intense gaze as when he first noticed her. She still couldn't understand what exactly had made him so angry. How dare he be jealous of her being with Director Park when he himself seemed to be having a good time surrounded by his friends? She remembered that girl who had clearly been trying to get his attention the entire evening. So she asked, what about him? Was he having fun playing silly kissing games with his friends all evening? She tried to push his hands off, saying she didn't expect him to still play such childish games, and asked how she was supposed to see him as anything but a kid when he spent his time like that. A smug grin suddenly spread across Lee Jae-hyun's face as he realized the girl was simply jealous. But all he said was that he hadn't known she'd been watching him the whole evening. Then he trapped her in the cage of his arms, leaned in closer with a satisfied smile, and reassured her that he only wanted to kiss her. When Eun-gyo asked if he didn't need to be in the right mood for that, the guy hugged her and replied that just meeting her gaze was enough for him to want to kiss her. His voice became quiet, and he asked if she wanted him to prove it to her right then and there. But the girl blushed and replied that they would be held accountable for inappropriate behavior in a public place. Suddenly, the guy straightened up, looked at her hand, and asked if the wound still hadn't healed. Eun-gyo looked at her hand, where the bandage he had applied was, and replied that she was sorry to remove it, but she was actually on her way to the pharmacy to get a new patch. Lee Jae-hyun was surprised by her honesty and, smiling, said that she was truly a master at driving him crazy. He smiled charmingly and, extending his hand, said that she must have heard what Director Park mentioned about him going off track without proper care, so he asked her to take care of him. She had no idea how he managed to overhear all the nonsense that man was saying, but she kept a calm demeanor and asked if he truly believed what he was saying. She took his hand in hers, and with a smirk, he replied that no, he didn't believe it. Sighing, Eun-gyo said that she didn't believe it either. They held hands tightly as she mentioned that he had just said he wanted to kiss her. Jae-hyun smirked again and said that she knew he wouldn't stop at just that. Sighing, the girl agreed. Then he suggested that they could head to his studio after dinner, take a shower, and continue. Eun-gyo liked his suggestion. Meanwhile, Park Sung-ju returned and remarked that the guy was the basement tenant, apparently always following Jung Eun-gyo, and it seemed he had gone after her even now. Kim Hae-da poured him some wine and replied that he was just a tenant, nothing more. He said that sometimes neighbors are closer than relatives, but the man smirked and told him not to treat him like a fool, adding that he didn't believe it. Kim Hae-da continued to act as if he didn't understand, and then Park Sung-ju told him that he had directly asked the guy about their relationship, and the answer was that it was a personal matter. The man was irritated that some young guy was acting like a guard dog. Kim Hae-da simply replied that he was still young, and besides, the girl had rejected him, so he shouldn't be so obsessed and should accept the refusal. Then the man suddenly asked if he had already seen Lee Do-yeon, and Kim Hae-da froze in surprise. Park Sung-ju took a sip of wine and said that he knew Lee Do-hyun was Eun-gyo's ex, and that he had started seeing him often at meetings with company directors. He then asked if he was trying to start his own business. Kim Hae-da asked where Park Seung-ju knew about their past relationship from. He hadn't expected the man to know about Eun-gyo's past and hoped he hadn't said anything foolish in front of her. He replied that he had heard about them since school and that since she had rejected him and wasn't seeing that other guy, it was possible she still hadn't forgotten Lee Do-yeon. But Kim Hae-da suddenly stood up and shouted that Lee Do-yeon was a real scoundrel, and he would never allow him to get close to his friend again. The man replied that if he cared so much about her, he should convince her to date him, as it was strange for a woman her age to be with a student. At that moment, Jung Eun-gyo returned and apologized for being late, saying she had been to the pharmacy. Park Sung-ju asked if her hand still hurt, and she replied that the burn wasn't severe, and everything was fine now. He said they had been waiting for her and, offering her a shrimp, advised her to try it. But at that moment, Kim Hae-da stopped his hand and said that the girl was allergic to seafood. Lee Jae-heon returned to his table with his friends, and everyone was happy to see him back. He immediately noticed how Eun-gyo was smiling, playfully arguing with Kim Hae-da. She seemed happy, joking with her friend, but the guy still felt a pang of jealousy. Suddenly, Director Park remarked that Kim Hae-da was quite the heartbreaker, mentioning that he had never seen him without a girl and asking who he was dating now. The guy gave him a serious look and replied that it seemed Sung-ju had had enough to drink and that he didn't have a girlfriend. At one point, he had only seen Jung Eun-gyo as his potential girlfriend, but she was too fixated on forgetting Lee Do-yeon. So he decided that he wanted to see her with someone who would make her smile and not dwell on the past. Yet, ironically, that person turned out to be Lee Jae-heon. After a while, the students happily thanked Director Park for the delicious dinner and said their goodbyes. His friends asked if Lee Jae-heon would continue hanging out with them, but he declined, saying that he was already tired and would head home. Jung Eun-gyo couldn't take her eyes off him and listened closely to everything the others were talking about. Kim Hae-da pinched her cheek and said that the girl was going to burn a hole in that guy with the way she was staring. He asked if she was really dating their tenant. The girl took a sip of wine and replied that it wasn't like that at all. Her friend looked at her and asked what was going on with her then. Had she decided to live life to the fullest all of a sudden? She thought about it and decided she just wanted to be someone else for a little while. They weren't in a relationship, but acted like a couple, and when they got tired of it, they would part ways without any unnecessary drama. So she asked her friend to just pretend he hadn't noticed anything. She didn't want to talk about it any longer, so she thanked him for his concern and said she wasn't a child. She was responsible for her own actions. Smiling, she said goodbye and wished him a good evening. Eun-gyo stepped outside and her head immediately filled with questions. How to find a replacement for Seon-tae, and what to do during the vacation that was starting tomorrow. She was thinking that she hadn't visited her parents in a while, and didn't immediately hear a familiar voice calling her name. Smiling, Lee Jae-heon caught up with her and said he was just coming back from the store. His open and kind face instantly took over all her thoughts. He said she had been so deep in thought she hadn't noticed him for a long time. The guy caught up to her and asked what she had been thinking about so seriously. The girl replied it was nothing special. Smiling, he said that her thoughts should be about him. As they approached the cafe, Eun-gyo suddenly froze, sensing a familiar smell she couldn't stand. She recognized the smell of the cigarettes Lee Do-hyun constantly smoked and covered her nose, confused by how he could be here. Meanwhile, Lee Jae-heon noticed a few cigarette butts by the wall and immediately understood what had unsettled the girl. His gaze turned cold. He knew who had been here. The girl did her best to suppress her nausea, scolding herself for still thinking about that bastard. She decided to distract herself and said that her clothes reeked of cigarettes after the restaurant. But Lee Jae-heon leaned in, took in her scent, and said she smelled really nice. The girl blushed and told him he was acting strange. Then he gently stroked her cheek and asked why she thought so. He said he really liked it. He moved even closer and inhaled the scent of her hair. His breath tickled her skin pleasantly. Suddenly, Eun-gyo asked if he wanted to come in and take a shower. The guy froze in surprise. A moment later, a pleased smile appeared on his face, and he asked if she was seriously inviting him over. Once inside her apartment, Lee Jae-heon kept joking that he'd love to shower with her, but the girl said she'd do it herself later. She said she needed to reply to a message from Seon-tae, but the guy smiled and said he couldn't give her much time. As soon as he went to shower, Eun-gyo thought it seemed like he had been with a lot of women. Even though he said he wasn't seeing anyone, he seemed like a natural seducer. Suddenly, her phone rang and she wondered who could be calling her at this hour. The girl picked up the phone and froze when she saw a number she knew by heart. Lee Do-hyun's. Her hands trembled and she didn't know what to do. What did he want from her? She wondered whether she should answer or keep ignoring him. Then she remembered the guy currently showering in her bathroom and decided now wasn't the time to take calls from her ex. So she declined the call and put the phone in the drawer so it wouldn't distract her. Her gaze fell on a velvet box, the one thing she still hadn't been able to throw away. She couldn't understand why the guy showed up after 3 years of silence. She closed the drawer, not wanting to think about it now and ruin her mood. Just then, Lee Jae-heon came out of the shower and asked what she was doing. The girl stood up, saying she was going to take a shower too, but the guy wrapped his arms around her waist and said he would help her undress. Eun-gyo turned to face him and, blushing, asked if he could think about something else for once. Jae-heon gave her a charming smile and replied that this is just the kind of guy he was. She looked at him shyly and asked if he would stay with her tonight. The guy smiled and said that after all that, she was now asking him to just sit quietly and wait for her here. Her cheeks reddened even more, and she asked whether he thought he could handle such a task. He leaned toward her and ran his hand through her damp hair, replying that even if he said he couldn't, she'd still ask him to do it. Eun-gyo answered that she absolutely would. Then he kissed her neck and asked if he listened and behaved, would he get a reward? Pulling away from her, he looked into her eyes. She gazed at him with longing and desire, and he said he'd gladly follow her request. Then, unexpectedly, Eun-gyo leaned in and kissed him gently. The girl headed to the bathroom while he kept cracking jokes and trying to go with her. When she finally left, his phone vibrated, and he decided to check who had messaged him. Kim Hae-da was urging him to pull himself together and insisted he should confess to Eun-gyo who he really was. According to him, Lee Do-hyun was spreading rumors that he and Eun-gyo were back together. But the guy decided that as long as no one knew they were brothers, there was no need to talk about it. He sat on the bed, thinking that he just needed to make sure Lee Do-hyun didn't meet Eun-gyo and maybe even help send him back abroad. Lee Jae-heon set his phone aside, thinking that even Kim Hae-da had figured out his place. So until he fully had Eun-gyo, he didn't want anyone interfering in their relationship. Right then, the girl walked into the room and he decided he should be the only bad guy in her life, the one who makes her worry and feel nervous. Meanwhile, Eun-gyo was wiping her still damp face and asked if he had waited obediently for her. Lee Jae-heon grinned and, dropping his towel to the floor, called her over. When they were face to face, the guy kissed her, sending a wave of goosebumps down her body. Then he looked at her with a mischievous glint in his eyes and said he had definitely earned a reward for his patience. A while later, Eun-gyo was breathing heavily, hugging Lee Jae-heon, her body trembling from pleasant exhaustion. He asked if she was okay. The girl wrapped her arms around his neck, pulled him closer, and replied that she felt wonderful and didn't want the night to end. Morning sunlight filtered through the light curtains as Eun-gyo opened her eyes. Someone was ringing the intercom, and she couldn't figure out who would come so early. She wanted to get up to check who it was, but Lee Jae-heon held her tightly in his arms and smiled, asking where she thought she was going. The girl replied that she wanted to see who was at the door, but the guy smirked slyly, caught her, and said he wasn't going to let her out of bed that easily. Then suddenly, they heard the sound of her phone ringing from the nightstand, and Eun-gyo wanted to check it, thinking it might be something important. But the guy caught her again and asked if she really had time to think about anything other than him. He was about to fully claim her attention when the doorbell rang again. Cursing, he said he'd go check who was being so persistent. Reluctantly getting out of the warm bed, he headed to the door, muttering under his breath about who could be bothering them so early. When he saw the familiar face on the screen, his expression turned cold and harsh. What the hell was that bastard doing here? Lee Jae-heon stood at the apartment door as if nothing had happened, smiling, clearly hoping Eun-gyo would open the door. In the end, he ignored him and returned to the room, telling the girl it was probably some salesman and that he was already gone. Still, she wanted to check who it was, and she headed for the door. But Lee Jae-heon quickly grabbed her by the waist and said he wanted to go back to bed. She tried to break free, but laughing, the guy started tickling her and saying he wouldn't let. Laughing together, they fell back onto the bed, and the girl asked why he was acting like such a spoiled child. Then Lee Jae-heon stopped, gently brushed her face with his hand, and said that he wanted even more. He cupped her face in his hands and asked her to stop getting distracted by external things and give him all her attention. Eun-gyo laughed loudly and joyfully until tears formed in the corners of her eyes. She looked so happy and carefree and asked what had gotten into him today. Trying to catch her breath from laughing, she asked him to stop being so silly. Pulling on his t-shirt, she said she'd go check if everything was okay and come back. She thought it might have been a delivery, but as soon as she opened the door, she immediately smelled the familiar scent of cigarettes and froze in horror. Lee Jae-heon saw her shoulders tense. He knew she had figured out who had come by. What irritated him the most was that he could still see traces of Lee Do-yeon in Eun-gyo. His gaze turned cold and cruel. He was furious that this bastard could still shake her up with nothing more than his scent. He asked if she realized who had come, but the girl just shrugged and said no one was there anymore. She walked past him, went to the fridge, and sighed, saying there was nothing to eat. Suddenly, she asked if Lee Jae-heon had any plans today. The guy smirked and walked up to her, asking if she'd invite him on a date if he said no. To his surprise, the girl actually did invite him on a date. His eyes widened. She turned around, blushing, and said her vacation started today. The girl froze when she saw the confused look on his face. She asked why he was so surprised. Did he really not want to go on a date with her? The guy replied that, honestly, he had been half joking, and he never thought she'd actually be the first to suggest something like that. He smiled and said he'd be happy to go on a date with her. Then he grinned mischievously and asked if she wanted to join him in the shower. But Eun-gyo shook her head no. So he said he'd go home, change clothes, and then come pick her up. Eun-gyo sat on the couch, replaying their recent conversation in her mind. Lee Jae-heon had looked embarrassed when she suggested going on a date, but he clearly wasn't against it. She looked at her missed calls and thought that she didn't want to be alone today. And even if she hadn't invited him on a date, they probably would have spent the day together anyway. Eun-gyo hoped that memories of Lee Do-hyun would eventually fade, just like other once-cherished memories had become just memories with time. She couldn't understand why his sudden reappearance after 3 years of silence had shaken her so much. Did she still have feelings for him? Was it anger at his sudden disappearance, or regret that it had all ended? But one thing she knew for sure. She couldn't avoid Lee Do-yeon forever, so she hit the call button. Eun-gyo remembered how, a few years ago, she had stood shyly in front of the guy. He had asked her to lift her head and look at how beautiful the sky was that day. She looked up and decided to take a photo of the sky. It really was insanely beautiful. But the guy kept blocking her view. The girl pouted, but secretly she thought that Lee Do-yeon was more beautiful than the sky, and his smile was sweet and tender. She wanted to admire it. The next moment, the guy caught her lips with his, taking her by surprise. She laughed and playfully scolded him for being so sneaky. At that moment, she was blissfully happy, not knowing that these memories would later remain in her like poison. That's why she now gathered her courage and called him. Lee Do-yeon answered immediately and asked why she hadn't answered his calls. He asked where she was. His voice was so casual, as if they'd seen each other just recently, as if nothing had happened between them. Her lower lip trembled, and anger welled up in her chest. She bitterly asked if he was suddenly interested in where she was. Lee Do-yeon remained calm and said it had been 3 years. He asked if it hurt, because he had lived like he was in hell. The girl couldn't hold back her tears and asked how he dared say that. Did he even know what hell was? She tried to hold back the flood of tears because she had decided he wasn't worth a single one. The girl bitterly thought that she was drowning in these pathetic, clinging feelings. When he suddenly said it was nice to hear her voice, even if she was angry, Eun-gyo thought he was still the same bastard and snapped that he hadn't changed one bit. She was disgusted talking to him. Despite that, Lee Do-yeon said he wanted to meet and talk, but the girl replied that if he couldn't say it over the phone, then there was no point in meeting. She said she had deleted his number a long time ago and only called back because she didn't recognize the missed call. She asked him not to call her again, but Lee Do-hyun acted as if he hadn't heard her and calmly said he missed her very much. Hearing that, the girl felt a surge of anger like she had never experienced before. The man said he wasn't trying to justify himself. He just wanted to say he missed her. But Eun-gyo hurled the phone to the floor, yelling at him to stop. She clenched her fists tightly, staring at the phone as water from the spilled glass soaked it. She was furious, thinking what a bastard he was. 3 years ago, when Lee Do-hyun suddenly left her, she knew he was tired of her. But like a fool, she believed he couldn't break up without saying a word. She called him every day, sobbing, hoping that one day he would answer. So now she smirked and thought how much one must despise someone to behave like that. He truly was a piece of trash. Lee Do-yeon heard her whole angry tirade, even though she had thrown the phone away. Nevertheless, he was pleased with himself. Even if she was furious this time, he knew she had memorized his number and had consciously called him. He smirked smugly and thought to himself that she could lie to herself all she wanted, but she still loved him. Then he looked at his phone and his expression turned somber. He had received a message from his ex-girlfriend with a photo of a child, claiming it was his son, and saying that if Lee Do-yeon didn't return to them, she would come to Korea and find him herself. He lowered his hand and thought she was just crazy, and that if Jo Yeon-ju hadn't deceived him, he never would have left like that. Lee Do-yeon stood in the middle of a large, bright house, imagining how he and Eun-gyo would arrange it, where the sofa and the TV would go. Then he looked at the panoramic window overlooking the forest and dreamily thought that this would be her study. A realtor appeared behind him and asked if he liked the house. She said it was rare for property to go on sale in this area, and she had a hard time finding a place with such a green view from every angle. Lee Do-hyun said he was satisfied and explained that his girlfriend worked a lot, and he wanted her eyes to rest while looking at the forest. The realtor was surprised they hadn't come to view the house together. Lee Do-hyun smiled and said he wanted to surprise her with a gift since he planned to marry her. The realtor congratulated him and said the house was perfect for newlyweds. He replied they were planning to move in together first and the wedding would be in a year. She told him it would still be best to come with his girlfriend next time, to which he replied that she was a little mad at him, but he was ready to sign the contract and asked her to prepare the necessary documents. The realtor said his girlfriend was lucky to have such a thoughtful man, and Lee Do-yeon smiled, saying he hoped she'd appreciate his gesture. Meanwhile, Eun-gyo sat on the couch, barely holding back tears, feeling a dull pain in her chest. Lee Jae-heon came out of the shower and called her. His face grew tense when she didn't pick up. Her phone was still lying on the floor, vibrating. She didn't even want to look at who was calling. She felt as if her soul cracked, just like the screen of her phone. End of Season 1. Thank you for staying with us through this story. If you enjoyed the recap, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next season. It's going to be even more emotional, dramatic, and romantic.